Chapter 187. Zhao Heng was completely enraged by her dodging action. He slapped her, causing her, who was a noble Wang Fei, to fall to the ground. He suddenly stood up and angrily scolded, "The one surnamed Pei, you are more dead than a dead person. Since you have such backbone, why don't you die? Why didn't you accompany your father to die for the country? Throw yourself into a well? There are 64 wells in the mansion. Hanging beams? This king has rewarded you with so many brocades and silks over the years. Hitting the railings? There are so many in the mansion. Don't worry, after you die, this king will definitely give you a grand funeral." Princess Pei didn't look at the ruthless king of Jing'an. She only looked mournfully at the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva whose kasaya covered the mountains. She coldly said, "I'm afraid of death, so I married you." The king of Jing'an was filled with endless disgust. He turned his back to the woman who he hadn't seen clearly for more than 10 years and stiffly said, "Get out." Princess Pei stood up and tidied her hair and clothes. She bowed and walked out of the temple. When she crossed the threshold, she asked, "Bailiang's heir's gift, should I accept it or not?" Zhao Heng sneered, "This king is still magnanimous. Just take it. This king knows that your painting skills are superb. Just don't use the prayer beads to do obscene things after drawing that bastard's portrait. You are degrading yourself. This king doesn't see it and doesn't feel annoyed. But if you stain the prayer beads and annoy the bodhisattva, then this king's years of praying for you will be wasted." Princess Pei indifferently said, "Oh." As soon as she left, the king of Jing'an, Zhao Heng, suddenly became a different person. He was undistracted, as if he had just flipped through the extremely difficult scriptures in the house. He sat on a praying mat made of vanilla and coldly said, "Lame Su, do you really think that this king won't dare to touch your son? Hereditary title? This king has turned your 20 years of painstaking effort into a joke." Jiang and I wanted to read, so Su Fengnian reluctantly endured and listened to her read 2,000 words. Then he went to find Yu Wei and prepared to take her to Xiangfan's Diaoyu Terrace to view the scenery. There were several old Taoists from the Taoist master's mansion in the Diaoyu Terrace. Su Fengnian wanted to see if he could personally ask some news about Huang Man at Mount Longhu. However, he was still not at ease with the letters written by that ox-nosed old Taoist Zhao Shituan. Yu Wei wore a gorgeous embroidered fur coat bought from Mount Laoshan's Qingfu satin shop. It was a typical West Chu style, which could be called a pile of red brocade. Unfortunately, in Su Fengnian's eyes, it was a bit too tight. He didn't want Yu Wei's soft breasts to be slightly exposed, but he also didn't want to not show the slightest bit of charm. Yu Wei was originally an outstanding beauty with a romantic figure, especially those 2 proud piles of fat on her chest. Su Fengnian was a bastard who had seen and tasted the tempting taste of Yu Wei. Yu Wei was so tightly wrapped that he even killed the chance for his imagination to roam. Fortunately, she was holding her beloved white cat, which squeezed out some of the natural color of her breasts. Su Fengnian smiled and said to himself, "I didn't raise you for nothing, Wu Mainyang." After they went out, Su Fengnian considerately asked, "Have you seen Shouyang Lake?" Yu Wei shook her head. Thus, Su Fengnian first took her to take a slight detour, passing by a white snake embankment. It seemed that the scenic spots that were related to immortals were mostly sword immortals. He had never heard of any that were related to sabers. For example, the white snake embankment was said to be a land immortal several hundred years ago, who couldn't stand a white snake stirring up trouble in the lake. He angrily slashed it with his sword, and after the white snake died, its huge body became a long embankment. The white snake embankment was like this, and so was the spring immortal lake. A saber user? There was no future. Su Fengnian, who was full of self-mockery, took Yu Wei along the way, which attracted a lot of attention. Some of the scholars who were touring the lake mustered up their energy to recite poems or sing loudly, hoping to win the favor of the lady holding the cat. Unfortunately, Yu Wei completely ignored them. Su Fengnian teased, "You didn't get to wear rouge, so don't you blame me?" Yu Wei just shook her head. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Logically speaking, your father is the Jixia scholar of Shangyin Academy, so you should like the children of landowning households. But previously in Bailiang, I didn't hear you have a poem with any scholar?" Yu Wei said softly, "Because I know that those scholars who keep on saying that they don't work, don't farm, and that the emperor decrees me to sleep alone are all people who go crazy when the emperor decrees them. Those who say that they want to shock the old dragon with a sword in the sky are actually people who don't even dare to kill a chicken. What poetry can I talk to them about? Su Fengnian nodded and said, that's right. They can't compare to me, a vulgar guy who openly spends money to buy literature. Otherwise, why do they say that men only speak 30% of their words, and leave 70% to conquer the world? Yu Yuwei lowered her head and didn't say anything. After slowly walking out of Shouyang Lake, Su Fengnian rode on the horse that Lu Qiantang had brought over. There were only 5 horses in total, and he didn't give Yu Yuwei a chance to ride alone. After getting on the horse, His Royal Highness hugged the beauty, and the beauty hugged the white cat. They became a beautiful sight on the street. When he rode to the city gate and went up the city tower, he found out that the old Taoist priests of Mount Longhu who were guarding the fishing tower had already left Xiangfan. It turned out that the heavenly talisman had already burned itself. No wonder the people of Xiangfan were so happy. Su Fengnian climbed up the fishing tower, and no one dared to stop him. After entering the towering city tower, Su Fengnian sized up the layout of the city while Yu Yuwei looked at the vast spring lake. Su Fengnian asked Ning Amei some questions about how to conduct a street battle after breaking through Xiangfan's city gate. Ning Amei was a clear horse battle general. After entering the Bailiang army, he mostly accumulated military merits by killing the Baimang barbarians at the border. When the two sides fought, most of the time it was a contest of strength on the plains. As for His Royal Highness's questions about sieging the city, Ning Amei could only tell the surface of what he had heard from the old soldiers. Fortunately, Su Fengnian was still listening attentively, occasionally nodding his head. When he encountered something he didn't understand, he would always get to the bottom of it. Ning Amei, who was a dabbler in street battles, couldn't help but stare at His Royal Highness. The burly Ning Amei, who was dressed in casual clothes, finally had some free time. Seeing His Royal Highness stop and gaze into the distance, he asked carefully, "Your Highness, why are you asking about these things? There's no chance of sieging a city on the Bailiang border." Su Fengnian smiled faintly and said, "Books and secret manuals. As long as it's in the books, I can get it if I want it. It's just a matter of time. But those things that aren't in the books might just be trivial matters, but they're priceless treasures to me. Besides, if we don't attack the city now, won't our 300,000-strong cavalry be able to flatten Baimang in the future?" Ning Amei, who was as strong as a bear, trembled. Su Fengnian turned his head and asked, "General Ning, has Jing'an Palace accepted the sandalwood box I asked you to deliver?" Ning Amei nodded and said, "It's been accepted." Su Fengnian gazed at the faraway Jing'an Palace in the city and muttered, "It doesn't matter if you see through me. Aren't you the most irreconcilable person in the world with that person in the capital?" Chapter 188. There was a temple that had been closed for 1,000 years. No matter if it was an emperor or a commoner who came to burn incense, it was never opened. This mountain temple had produced countless eminent monks. The most famous one was Yang Taisui. He was the teacher of the current 2 dynasties and was very likely to be the teacher of the 3 dynasties in the future. There were more than 3,000 eminent monks who had passed away in the temple. Among them, more than 200 were titled as teachers of the state. It started from the Vajrayana Zen to the Zen Zen. In the Northern Wei dynasty, 36 bodhisattvas opened a translation field on the mountain at the same time. The Buddha's light shone everywhere. 800 years ago, the founder of the Zen sect, Yi, crossed the sea and taught the Mahayana Wall Temple. Finally, it became the ancestral court of Buddhism. For hundreds of years, Buddhism and Taoism had been fighting. Every 10 years they would debate with Taoism. Buddhism would send monks from this temple to discuss with Mount Longhu. But it was different from the ancestral court of Taoism. There were not many rules here. Anyone could go up the mountain and go anywhere on the mountain. Here the mountain was high, the temple was high, the tower was high, the Dharma was high, and the mountain was high. But like the name of the temple, 2 Zen, it did not have a name. This was the world's number 1 2 Zen temples. Some people said that the reason why this temple was called 2 Dhyanas was because it cultivated self-meditation and other meditation, namely, meditation of oneself and meditation of others. But for more than 1,000 years, there did not seem to be a unified official statement. The 2 Zen temples also did not explain anything. At the back of the mountain, there was a forest of pagodas at the foot of the mountain. It was the burial place of the eminent monks of the 2 Zen temples. There were more than 1,000 of them. The size of the pagodas were different. The two Zen temples did not intend to make this a forbidden area. But the believers were devout and did not dare to set foot here. Over time, very few people came here to observe. There was 1,000 Buddha hall at the edge of the forest of pagodas. The walls were painted with hundreds of meters-long fist manuals. There were 108 potholes on the floor. It was said that they were the footprints of Luo Han. Thousands of people came to see thousands of fists. Therefore, it was praised that the world's fists were called two Zen. On the east side of the 10,000 Buddha hall, there was a small outhouse where a nameless white-robed monk lived all year round. If it wasn't for the fact that the bald man was wearing a kasaya, he wouldn't have looked like a monk at all. Not only did this white-robed middle-aged monk drink and eat meat, the most outrageous thing was that he had a wife. He even had a daughter who grew up in the temple. No matter how one looked at him, he was a middle-aged drunkard monk with evil deeds. Fortunately, apart from his unruly lifestyle, he did not make enemies with others. He only took in a good-tempered little disciple. In addition, his daughter was lively and liked to climb up and down the mountain. It was said that the oldest abbot in the temple liked this child very much. The white-robed monk inadvertently got into trouble several times and was chased and punished by the old-fashioned senior monks in the commandment yard. So he asked his daughter to go to the abbot's room to ask for a few sticks of sugar-coated haws to satisfy her cravings. As long as the old abbot looked at his little daughter, he would immediately calm down. The disciple of this middle-aged monk who guarded the pagoda forest was not simple. At a young age, he became a preaching monk in the temple and was allowed to wear a light red kasaya that covered his left shoulder. The little monk's dharma name was Ichan. It was very strange, but compared to his master's dharma name, it didn't seem strange. On a sunny day, the poor little monk sat in front of the outhouse and washed a large basin of his master and mistress' clothes. He sighed. On the day of the Lantern Festival, he went down the mountain to watch the Lantern Festival. In the end, he was accidentally dragged to Mount Longhu by that thing. At the Taoist master's residence, he had a few words with Mr. White Lotus. Fortunately, he wasn't locked up and beaten. However, as soon as he returned to the temple, he suffered a calamity. His mistress was indeed lazy. She didn't wash so many dirty clothes and didn't mind piling them in the room. She didn't want to leave until she returned to the temple. Moreover, it was clearly that thing's idea to sneak out to play. When my master and mistress saw that thing, they were still so kind. When they turned to look at me, they changed their expressions. When I ate, even the rice in my bowl was much less. Sigh, this thing should be going down the mountain with his mistress to buy rouge and face powder. Master was actually quite pitiful. A drunk monk in white clothes walked out of the outhouse. He was very tall and sat down next to the little monk. He also had a bitter face. The little monk didn't even want to look at him. In fact, his master didn't have it easy either. The little monk washed the clothes until his waist and back ached. He was very bored, so he could only casually ask, "Master, when I went up the mountain, I heard that a famous monk from the south came to the temple. He's fighting with Abbot Hui Nang for territory. Who do you think will win?" The monk in white yawned and unhappily said, "A foreign monk is good at chanting scriptures. Besides, your martial uncle Hui Nang's fighting skills are about the same as yours. He most likely won't win." The little monk curled his lips and angrily said, "You're not willing to teach me profound martial arts. What can I do? I've looked at the martial arts manuals on the 3 walls of the 1,000 Buddha hall for so many years, but I really can't see how powerful they are." This master didn't have the slightest sense of responsibility and half-heartedly said, "That's why that thing said you're an idiot." The stupid north-south sighed and said, "Master, do you think I'll be able to create a Buddhist relic in this lifetime? If I can't, I think it's better for me to go practice martial arts. That thing always likes to run down the mountain. I'm afraid she'll be bullied. I can't beat her." The monk in white thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, then you can first use those 8 or 9-year-old novice monks in the temple as punching bags. After a while, you'll become a master." The little monk said angrily, "You've said this before. Last year, I listened to you and went to beat up a novice monk. In the end, the monk's master came to scold me. You, on the other hand, just ran away. Master's wife almost pulled my ear off." The middle-aged monk pretended to be surprised and said, "There's such a thing?" The little monk who had accepted his fate, lowered his head and fiercely rubbed his dirty clothes. There was no movement for a long time. The little monk turned his head and saw that his master was looking up at the cloudless sky in a daze. He couldn't help but ask, "Master, what are you looking at?" The monk in white stretched out a finger and pointed. The little monk instinctively looked at his master's finger. Very quickly, his master knocked him on the head and scolded, "You're not convinced that you're an idiot. I've already pointed it out for you. What are you looking at? With such a slow comprehension, you still want to burn a Buddhist relic after you die?" The stupid North-South first wiped his wet hands on his pants and then rubbed little bald head. He was ready to get to the bottom of this matter. Otherwise, he would have been beaten for nothing. "Master, you haven't told me what I'm looking at." His master said seriously, "I'm looking at the moon." The little monk rolled his eyes and said, "Master, can you see it in broad daylight?" No wonder his master's Buddhist name was No Zen. The monk in white raised his head and said softly, "Sigh, the first time I saw your master's wife, it was under the moonlight. Stupid North-South. I miss your master's wife again." The little monk said angrily, "Just think about it. Why are you telling me?" His master asked, "Don't you miss her?" The stupid North-South immediately laughed foolishly. He washed his clothes more diligently and said naively, "Of course I do. Why wouldn't I?" His master knocked him on the head again and then said earnestly, "Why are you telling your master about the things you miss? You know that she's my daughter, but you still get beaten up by me. You idiot, I've taught you so many profound Buddhist teachings in vain." The little monk said angrily, "If you hit me again, be careful that you don't have an epiphany. At that time, I'll become a Buddha and burn a Buddhist relic. Then, I'll be able to see if she's paying attention to you." His master said disdainfully, "Epiphany is what I taught you. As for the Buddhist relic, I don't care about it at all. Don't pretend to be a hero in front of me. If you have the ability, go to your master's wife and raise your voice." The little monk was filled with grief and indignation, but he did not make a sound. The stupid North-South only found out that his master was more profound than he had imagined after he left the mountain. There was a saying at the foot of the mountain. His master, who had also grown up on the mountain, spent 6 years in Ganlu and read all the scriptures in the world. He felt that there were many sects and all of them had different doctrines. His master said that he wanted to sacrifice himself and go thousands of miles away to seek a big foundation. Thus, he went west to seek Buddhism. He left for 15 years. Isn't Lantua Mountain in the western regions far enough? But his master wanted to go even further. He obtained the Yogi's treatise on earth, to unify all the different doctrines. He studied in a temple in the far west for 10 years and mastered 50 scriptures. He returned in the 31st year of Ganlu. When he arrived at Great Peace City, it was said that even the emperor personally came out of the palace to welcome him. There were hundreds of thousands of spectators lining the streets, fighting to see the white-clothed monk. Thus, there was a snow pavilion in the temple. The late emperor personally wrote the words "White Snow Heart Reflecting Pearl." If he only came here, the little monk, stupid North-South, would definitely feel like he was listening to a story. Later, his master brought up the idea of becoming a Buddha on the spot in the temple. This was contrary to the orthodoxy of Zen. As a result, his master's 15-year journey became a farce and he was almost chased out of the 2 Zen temples. His master's so-called "every action is in the Taoist field, whether it is the heart or the feelings, all return to the sea of nature," was only slightly recognized in recent years. No matter what, the scene of hundreds of thousands of people kneeling and worshipping Buddha together in the capital was no longer there. Fortunately, his master had one thing that the little monk admired. No matter how the people at the foot of the mountain looked at or refuted him, it was not as effective as a single word from his master's wife. The white-clothed monk smiled and said, "Stupid North-South, your master is no longer in the mood to compete with others. I'll rely on you to carry forward the concept of epiphany." The little monk said nervously, "Master, don't. You have your master's wife, but don't I have my master's wife? Most likely, I won't be able to take care of your Zen." The white-clothed monk looked a little annoyed. He touched his big bald head and laughed. "I really envy you, stupid. Your master has no Zen to talk about." The little monk sighed. His master said softly, "It's going to rain. It's going to be sunny. It can't be, right? It's going to rain. Master. Why do you always say such nonsense? Aren't all the Dhamma in the scriptures like this? Keep your voice down. If the abbot hears you, he'll deduct our copper coins again. Tacky. You want to burn a Buddhist relic like this? What's wrong? I want to become a Buddha because I don't have money to buy my master's rouge. Otherwise, why would I burn myself to ask for a Buddhist relic? Chapter 189. Oh, not bad, not bad. You have the ability to comprehend and have a good foundation. You are indeed my disciple. Master, if that's the case, why don't you help me wash some clothes? You're asking for a beating. Huding County in Gangnam-do was not famous for its plump lotus peony, but for a dissolute widow with the surname Su. She had married from Baelyong and had cursed 2 of her husbands to death. Both of her husbands were top-notch nobles in the area. One of them was ranked 2nd in the imperial examination, and had passed away in the imperial examination. It was supposed to be a joyous occasion, but he had died an unnatural death. The other one was not bad either. He was ranked 3rd in the imperial examination and had also passed away suddenly after marrying the widow surnamed Su. Therefore, people in Gangnam-do jokingly asked if the next top scorer would be the one to suffer. However, this widow had recently hooked up with a scholar from Jiangxin County next door. That man was the son of an elegant official in Gangnam-do. His father's generation were all literary heroes. This man's surname was Lu Lighting, also known as Mr. Qingzhai. At the age of 14, he could compose beautiful poems and was proficient in voice and rhythm. He was especially immersed in playing the zither and was famous for his culinary skills. He had a unique style among the scholars in Gangnam-do. His first wife was also from a big family and had both integrity and talent. However, after meeting the widow, Lu Lighting went crazy and wanted to divorce her. Originally, it was just a matter between 2 families. At most, it would be a joke in Gangnam-do. However, for some reason, Lu Lighting's wife had an inextricable relationship with an imperial concubine in the capital. That imperial concubine was extraordinary, and the precepts for women that all women in the world had to read was written by her. When such a scandal reached the ears of the imperial concubine in Gangnam-do, she naturally flew into a rage. This imperial concubine was extremely favored in the imperial palace and was even treated as a sister by Empress Zhao. Therefore, when she frowned, it was not too far off from the anger of the emperor. Therefore, the high-ranking officials in Gangnam-do no longer dared to have any thoughts of watching the drama and braced themselves to denounce her. Although Lu Lighting wrote a moral essay that made people want to slap the table in praise, it did not seem very manly. When he saw that even the imperial concubine in the palace was angry, he immediately sobered up. First, he wrote a poem to break off all relations and sent it to the widow's door. Then, he went to his wife and bitterly complained to a group of scholars that he was on good terms about how the seductive widow had seduced him. For a moment, the pitiful woman surnamed Su was besieged on all sides. If it were not for her family's strong background, she would have drowned in the spit of saliva. Lu Lighting's wife even specially went to Baogua Temple to burn incense and slapped her, calling her a slut. That seductive widow was not angry at all and only smiled faintly. It was unclear whether it was a bitter smile or a sneer. At that time, the scholars who were present to watch the drama were all moved. The peonies of Baogua Temple were the best in Jiangnan. According to the study of geography, the earth veins of Huding County were the most suitable for peonies. That was why they were able to cultivate such beautiful flowers. At that time, Huding County's 2 unique peonies, Yao Huang and Wei Zi, were sent to the capital as tributes. The flowers bloomed and withered for 20 days. The entire capital was in a frenzy. There were no less than 100 types of peonies in Baogua Temple. Other than the Yao Huang and Wei Zi that were known as the Queen of the Peonies, there were many other treasures such as Green Dragon Crouching Lake, Zhao Fan, Flesh Hibiscus, and so on. The biggest pilgrim in Baogua Temple was the widow Su, who was currently being condemned by everyone. Every 1st and 15th day of the month, she would come to burn incense and worship, rain or shine. She only loved the peonies. Zhao Fan. In the backyard of the temple, there was a Zhao Fan that was as big as a bucket. Its branches and leaves were scattered, dripping and clustered, and it was staggered out of the eaves. Due to her illustrious family background and eccentric style in Huding County, this unique peonies had almost become her exclusive ornamental attraction. Today was the 15th day of the month. The first day of the month was the day she was slapped in the face by Mrs. Lu. She brought a personal maid into the backyard. When she left home to get married, she brought many servants and maids with her, but she was not close to any of them. Only this maid, who came from a poor family, liked her very much for no reason. She was strict in governing her family.
There were few servants in the residence who did not harbor fear in their hearts.
Only this maid, whom she named Xiao Er, knew how to repay kindness and protected her master in all respects. Today, when she got off the horse and walked into the temple, countless people were secretly pointing at her. The little maid was angry. Now that there was no one around, she bitterly defended the injustice and said, "Miss, these pilgrims are really hateful. If they want to burn incense, then they should burn incense. Why are they secretly laughing when they see Miss?" The widow, who was not yet 30 years old, pinched the maid's face and said with a charming smile, "You still have a conscience." The little maid said indignantly, "Miss, that Lu lighting is too much." During those days, he was the one who pestered Miss like a dog skin plaster. In the end, the villain complained first. Are those scholars who are well-read all blind? Why are they all speaking up for him? The pretty widow could not help but laugh. She bent down to look at a gorgeous peony. She pinched off a small petal the size of a fingernail with her fingers and sniffed it. She squinted her eyes and said with a smile, "Aren't most men in the world like this? What's there to be angry about? It's not worth it to be angry about it." The little maid said timidly, "Miss, let's talk about something." The widow was amused and said, "Oh, are you thinking of love? Which scholar have you taken a fancy to? Tell me, if he's really not bad." The little maid shook her head desperately and bit her lips. She looked up with a determined face and said, "Miss, the shrew in Lu Lighting's house is too hateful. I heard that she often goes to Mount Qing Temple to worship. I want to slap her in the face. I beg Miss not to plead for Chow Chow. If I'm beaten to death, I'll be beaten to death. I want to help Miss vent her anger. I know Miss is not having a good day today, so please don't worry about me anymore." She was stunned for a moment. She gently pinched the petal with 2 fingers and laughed involuntarily. "I didn't feel sorry for you in vain. But you're just a little girl. Why are you involved? If you're slapped in the face, then you're slapped." Chapter 190. The little girl was so anxious that she cried. Her face was full of tears as she sobbed, "No, as long as I think about Miss being bullied for no reason, I want to fight that shrew with my life. If Miss didn't save me, I would have been defiled by that wicked person. I've never studied and can't read, but when my parents were alive, they always said that I should remember other people's good deeds. I remember Miss's good deeds the most." The widow wiped the little girl's tears and said softly, Okay, I didn't want to say it, but seeing you like this, I'll tell you so that you can rest assured. As for me, I purposely kept that slap. You also know that I have an unruly younger brother. He's very busy on this trip. Originally, I wasn't sure if this younger brother would first visit his second sister or come to Huting County to visit me, his eldest sister. If he heard about this slap, wouldn't he have rushed over to my place? His second sister cares about the world and doesn't care about this. I can't do that. I always like to fight. It's rare that I don't suffer in life. This is one of my few pleasures." The little girl nodded vigorously and said, "Yes. I know that Mrs. younger brother is Bail Yong, His Royal Highness. The servants in the mansion always like to whisper about His Highness, but every time they see me, they shut up." The widow rubbed the little girl's ears and said with a smile, "With you as my ear, who in the mansion dares to gossip? If I find out, won't they be skinned and have their tendons pulled out?" The little girl finally smiled through her tears. Her miss seemed to be in a good mood every time she talked about His Highness. The widow's brows really relaxed a bit. She said with a smile, "My younger brother has been good-looking since he was young. We don't plant many peonies at home, but every time the flowers bloom, I'll take him to admire the flowers. I pick them and put them on his head. He's prettier than a girl. Unfortunately, it's going to rain in a few days. I don't know if he can make it in time." The little girl wiped her face with her sleeve and said innocently, "The Bodhisattva will definitely protect Miss from the rain." The widow whispered softly, "Little girl, how can you understand the pain of the heartless wind and rain breaking up a romantic romance?" The little girl, who couldn't hear clearly, asked curiously, "What did Miss say?" The widow teased, "You won't understand even if I tell you." As if she was afraid that the little servant girl would do something stupid, the widow said softly, "When my little brother arrives at the Jiangnan circuit, you will know how those noble scholars and rich children who usually have their eyes at the top of their heads are not worth anything." At the top of the mountain was the residence of the Taoist master, where the nobles of purple and yellow gathered. At the foot of the mountain was a dilapidated old Taoist temple where a pair of master and disciple depended on each other. The master, the old Taoist master, wanted his disciple to improve. At first, the old Taoist master's ultimate skill was the dream of spring and autumn. This was a Taoist secret art that even the four great Taoist masters couldn't practice. The disciple didn't want to learn or listen to it. Until one day, the old Taoist master was enlightened. He took a letter from the Bailiang His Royal Highness and purposely said that it was from Su Fengnian. In the letter, he hoped that Huang Manor could learn this spring and autumn Taoist method that could make one sleep for 500 years. As a result, he did it by accident. His foolish disciple pricked up his ears and really learned the dream of spring and autumn with all his heart. It wasn't difficult to memorize this method, but the difficult part was how to operate the qi. The Great Yellow Kingdom sought thick, but the dream of spring and autumn was the opposite. It sought thin, and when practiced to the peak of mystery, there would be almost no qi in the body. The reason why the old Taoist master valued his disciple Su Longxiang and humbled himself to beg the king of Bailiang was because Su Longxiang was born with great strength and was in the terrifying Vajra realm. If he learned the dream of spring and autumn, he would be like a tiger with wings. How could the old Taoist master, Zhao Shituan, not hope that there would be a second Qi Xianzhang on the mountain? As for whether Su Longxiang came from the Taoist master's residence, Zhao Shituan didn't care at all. In this life, there were many people from the Taoist master's residence who called him a traitor. In the past, it was Su Longxiang who refused to learn. As his master, the old Taoist priest had a headache. But now, the old Taoist priest Zhao still had a headache. That kid had gone berserk. He was half asleep and half awake 24 hours a day. This spring and autumn dream was simply tailor-made for Su Longxiang. The old Taoist master could have squatted with his disciple to watch the ants or the stream. Even if they couldn't talk, at least he had a companion to listen to his nagging. But now, the old Taoist master had nothing to do and was too bored. He could only count on his fingers to calculate when His Royal Highness would come to Mount Longhu. The old Taoist master, who had an extremely high seniority and an extremely strange temper, was squatting by the Green Dragon stream in a daze. He was fretting over why he couldn't see the beautiful girl on the raft. The disciple who never spoke walked out of the Taoist temple for the first time and squatted by the side. The old Taoist master, who was incomparably gratified, laughed and said, "My disciple, you've finally come out to take a breather?" As expected, there was no response. The old Taoist master said to himself, "I've been pursuing the Tao all my life, but I can't see it clearly. I feel like it's covered by clouds and mist. In the end, when I see you, I realize that this Tao is not Tao." Su Longxiang just stared blankly at the stream. The old Taoist master sighed and said, "One day before we go down the mountain, I'll take you to see an old senior. It'll be enough if you can withstand 100 moves." Huang Manor plucked a leaf and handed it to his master. The old Taoist master took the leaf and smiled bitterly. "Your disciple, I don't know how to whistle. Huang Manor, do you miss your brother?" The dazed Su Longxiang actually smiled and nodded. The old Taoist master felt a little sad. "Your brother will arrive when there are hawthorns on the mountain." Although the old Taoist master had heeded Bailiang's advice to dress up properly before going down the mountain, and had even specially borrowed a Xueqi peachwood sword from his disciples, he was still a mess on the mountain. The straw sandals he wore were made by himself, and his Taoist robes were tattered and covered in dust. At this moment, Huang Manor lowered his head and stretched out his withered arm to pat the dust off the old Taoist master's body. The old Taoist master, who had no wife, no children, and no grandchildren for the sake of the word Tao, was stunned on the spot. In an instant, tears streamed down his face. Chapter 191. Su Fengnian left Diaoyu Terrace and wandered around the city with Yu Wei. He saw an alley crowded with people, and there was no lack of young scholars in green robes. As he walked closer to take a look, he found that they were gambling on chess. There were people squatting, sitting, and standing. Su Fengnian then remembered that other than Xianxia Alley being a money-squandering den in Xiangfan, this Yongzi Alley was also quite famous. The people sitting against the wall in the alley were all nogi with chess pieces and chess boxes. They used the strength of their chess skills to bet different amounts to lure tourists and chess addicts who were itching to play. This kind of game was naturally difficult to attract the attention of the chess masters, but it was the best way to waste the time of the common people and poor scholars. In addition, the bets were usually no more than a dozen copper coins, so it could be considered a small gamble to entertain the mood. Su Fengnian smiled and took a bite of the marinated beef wrapped in oiled paper. In the past, he was penniless and hungry, so there was a period of time when he gambled in the alley to earn money. With his chess skills trained by scholarly Ishan and Su Weisheng, it was not difficult for him to win. However, there were often people of the same trade who had to make a living. Those who were reasonable would mind their own business, but those who were unreasonable would use the fact that they were locals to drive His Royal Highness away. In addition, there were rules to winning chess. One could not kill the dragon easily, but one had to keep a sense of propriety and win a few pieces. Otherwise, if the opponent was defeated, they would not be willing to continue playing chess. This was the vulgar truth that Su Fengnian was forced to slowly understand. His Royal Highness had LV Yangshu and the other two stand further away, leaving only Ning Mei standing behind him. He pulled Yu Wei and found a gap to make use of. The player who placed the bet was a young man who looked like a down-and-out student. His clothes were mended and his shoes and socks were white. In front of him, there were 10 chess pieces placed on the chessboard. This meant that if the player who placed the chess pieces lost, he would have to pay 10 sets of money. Usually, only 2 or 3 chess pieces would be placed on the board. It was rare to see 5 chess pieces. It could be seen that this nogi was quite confident. Su Fengnian squatted down and was hesitating whether he should take out a few copper coins to place his bet. When he looked up, he saw that the player was blind. How could he play this game? As if accustomed to this situation, the blind player warmly said, "It's okay. When I hear the sound of a chess piece being placed, I will know where to place it." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "I'll place a bet of 10 copper coins." The blind player took out his money pouch from his sleeve and weighed it in his hand. With an ashamed expression he said softly, "Young master, if I lose, I will owe you 16 copper coins. If you don't mind, I have a chess manual that has been passed down from my ancestors. It should be worth that amount." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Okay." Su Fengnian didn't really care about chess manuals. There were countless chess manuals in the Tide Listening Pavilion that could make famous chess players go crazy, such as the Peach Blossom Spring Chess Manual, the Exquisite South Sea Game Manual, the Immortal Bestowment Manual, and so on. His Highness could pile them up into a small mountain, let alone now that the chessboard had turned from 15 to 19. Usually the older a chess manual was, the less valuable it was. Generally speaking, the strength of the muscles in the hands of ancient and modern chess players was getting stronger and stronger. The blind player, who was sitting cross-legged against the wall, had a box of black chess pieces under his knees. He spread out his hands slightly and gestured for Su Fengnian to go first with white. Although this nogi was dressed shabbily, his bearing was not to be underestimated. His every move revealed the refined and ancient style of a true aristocratic family. Before the official match, both sides would place 2 chess pieces on opposite sides of the board, which were called positions. These were the positions of ancient chess pieces. To a large extent, they limited the advantage of going first. Moreover, they were destined to fight fiercely in the middle of the board. Su Fengnian passed the marinated beef to Yu Wei and took the lead to place a 3-6. This position was rated as the best aggressive position by the self-proclaimed Huang Sonjia Grandmaster, Huang Longshi. The young blind player's expression was calm. Indeed, he could distinguish positions by listening. The black chess piece was placed with a 9-3 and was in a stalemate with the white chess piece. Following that, each of the 9 black and white chess pieces were placed with the same style as their predecessors. Yu Youwei's father, who was watching from the side, was once an illustrious chess master in West Chu. When he was studying at Shangyin Academy, he was only defeated by Huang Longshi, who was said to have unparalleled battle prowess. Since young, she had been influenced by her father's chess style. Naturally, she was proficient in chess theory. Perhaps even the small Bailiang chess player Lu Yi of Wutong Garden would not dare to say that he could win against Yu Youwei. Yu Wei was somewhat disappointed when they saw each other's 10 moves. However, Su Fengnian's 11 moves made Yu Youwei's eyes brighten. The blind player was also slightly stagnant. He no longer placed his chess piece at lightning speed. After thinking for a moment, he picked up his piece and placed it again. As the old saying goes, a chess piece is born from a break. Su Fengnian's next few moves were all born from this break. It could be said that this was an ingenious move. The blind player endured patiently all the way. Finally, the black 18 made the first move before the corner was settled. 5 or 6 flew attacks. Yu Youwei frowned and pondered deeply. This move had as many as 44 changes. She subconsciously looked at Su Fengnian. He was still calm and collected. His speed of placing chess pieces was the same from beginning to end. When the white 43 moved gently, the chessboard was instantly filled with murderous intent. Yu Yue watched with trepidation. This move was really too ferocious. The white 59 flew to add and the 83-pointed attack was similarly aggressive. Unexpectedly, the blind player's situation was like a small boat in the ocean. It swayed but did not fall. After the black 18 moves, victory was already firmly in his grasp. Su Fengnian very calmly admitted defeat. Su Fengnian took out another 10 copper coins and said, "Still 10 wens." The blind player played white first. In this game, Su Fengnian stirred up the smoke early, and the blind player calmly responded. Yu Yue vaguely saw some clues. Su Fengnian was extremely aggressive, but the blind player was not the same as most people. The most important thing was the formation of the terrain. Some of the moves that seemed to be casually placed could always resonate with the middle game and even the ending game. If Su Fengnian did not rely on endless tricks to forcibly set off waves of unreasonable killing, the two games would not have lasted more than 200 moves. At the moment, Su Weisheng, who was a woman of great talent, changed 15 to 19, and broke the position system. In Yu You's view, the blind player who was slightly better than His Royal Highness was destined to amaze the world. Moreover, it was hard to say whether this player was hiding his strength or not. Indeed, it was a case of hidden dragons in the marketplace and crouching tigers in the alley. Again! Su Fengnian, who had lost 2 games in a row, chuckled softly. This time, he played white and started with 2 swallows. This routine was once widely spread, but in the past 50 years, the most outstanding national players had all abandoned it in the fierce battles of the Summit Challenge. Huang Longshu even said that the 2 swallows were too tight at the beginning and lost its mellow flavor. It could be said that he had given this classic layout a death sentence. Su Fengnian simply sat on the ground. As a result, he changed to a more comfortable position. On the chessboard, he was defeated like a mountain. He easily lost 3 games in a row. There was already a pile of 30 copper coins in front of the blind player. Su Fengnian raised his head and looked at the sky through the eaves of Yongzi Alley. It was already time for dinner. However, it was rare to meet Nogi, who was so good at chess. He waved his hand and called Xu Xiu to his side, asking her to go to the wine shop to get some food. Soon, Xu Xiu carried a large food box with 4 pairs of bowls and chopsticks. After Yang Qingfeng tested that the food was not poisonous, Xu Xiu dared to put it in front of Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "I don't plan to leave for a while. Do you want to eat some?" The blind player did not care about trifles and nodded with a smile. Yu Yue was a pampered girl who lived like a princess. She did not feel like she was losing her composure when eating with Su Fengnian. The halberd Ning Mei, on the other hand, was standing and wolfing down the food in a few mouthfuls. As Nogi ate slowly, he even took the initiative to talk to Su Fengnian about the gains and losses of the 3 defeats. When he talked about Su Fengnian's skillful moves, he did not hide his admiration. When he talked about his moves, he also straightforwardly pointed out the shortcomings. Su Fengnian frequently nodded and benefited a lot. They chatted happily. Su Fengnian smiled and asked the blind player if he had learned from a famous chess master. The blind player shook his head and said that his family background was ordinary. Before he lost his sight, he had just started playing chess. After losing his sight, he had no one to rely on and could only play chess as a companion. He had been playing chess in Yongzi Alley for almost 10 years. The money he earned was only enough for him to eat and wear. Whenever he had free time, he would buy chess manuals and did not save a single bit of money. As he spoke, the blind player patted his head and took out a few Confucian classics from his bag. He handed them to Su Fengnian, whose book could only touch the floor. He chuckled and said, "Cushion." Su Fengnian took the books and took out 2 to give to Yu Yue, whose legs were already numb. He smiled and said, "Isn't this inappropriate? It's a disgrace to the teachings of the saints." The blind player smiled and shook his head. Propriety, justice, integrity, and shame are not in the books. Su Fengnian was no longer pretentious. He ate and drank to his heart's content with the wild chess player in front of him who had won 31 from him. Once again, smoke rose from the 19 paths. Su Fengnian repeatedly lost and did not feel tired. When the blind chess soldiers came, he blocked the water, and when the earth blocked the earth. His chess pieces were crisp and his expression was calm. The 10 games in Yongzi Alley were fought until the sky turned dark. From noon to dusk to moonlight, the dust settled. Su Fengnian lost 10 games in a spurt of energy and paid 100 copper coins. Nogi had already left Yongzi Alley. Su Fengnian sat cross-legged in front of a Confucian classic. He looked at the losing game on the chessboard and sighed heavily. He said, "With your skill, you can compete with Su Weisheng from the Yin Academy." Chapter 192. Wild Chess Master shook his head and said, "Normal people only have one side when they play chess. I can barely have 2 sides. Today's famous chess masters can take care of 3 sides. Mr. Wei Xiong and Huang Sanjia both play 4 sides. How would I dare to be an ant trying to shake a big tree? But if I can play a game with Mr. Wei Xiong in this life, I will have no regrets even if I die." Su Fengnian helped to pack up the chess pieces and put them in the box. Then he stood up and joked, "I don't have the state of being willing to die at night like you. It's not wrong to lose to you. Hey, Shangyin Academy's famous Donghu 10 positions. We also have Yongzi 10 positions. Let's part ways here." The blind Nogi smiled and said, "I'll give these books to you, young master." Su Fengnian understood immediately. 2 of the books had been under Yu Youwei's but for a long time. Nogi must have heard the news and knew that they were his family. To avoid suspicion, it would be inappropriate to ask for them back. Su Fengnian took out another 10 coins and gave it to the thin chess player behind him. He joked, "Take the last 10 coins as buying 2 pounds of etiquette, justice, integrity, and shame from you." The chess player hesitated but still accepted it. He smiled gently and said, "Young master doesn't lack these." Su Fengnian laughed and left. The blind chess player packed up his luggage and stood alone in the quiet alley. He faced the entrance of the alley and bowed deeply. Su Fengnian walked out of Yongzi Alley and rode back. He clicked his tongue and said, "There's such a powerful person in this small Yongzi Alley." Yu Yuwei frowned and asked, "He's an assassin?" Su Fengnian couldn't help but laugh. He rested his chin on Yu Youwei's head and said helplessly, "You think too much. I'm just lamenting that blind chess master Mu's amazing chess skills. He claimed that he could only play on 2 sides of the chessboard, but he was too modest. I dare say that second sister would lose 2 or 3 out of 10 games against him. It must be because he has never talked with a top national player, so he doesn't know how good he is." Yu Yuwei nodded and said, "This person is good at playing chess by giving up in order to take, bending in order to stretch, and has a broad vision. However, that wasn't all. In the 9th round, he was angered by your unreasonable move. That was why he revealed his extraordinary strength even in a head-on battle. If he really comes from an ordinary family and is self-taught after losing his sight, then there is no doubt that he is a natural talent in chess." Su Fengnian said softly. His eyes were blinded. Yu Yuwei was stunned. Su Fengnian sighed ruefully. Every family has its own difficulties. This heir isn't interested in the bitterness behind it. Yu Yuwei rubbed Wu Meinyang's head and asked, "Have you never thought of inviting him to your side as an advisor?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "Being good at chess doesn't mean that you'll be able to become an official. I've already lost 100 copper coins, so I won't gamble again." Yu Yuwei smiled but didn't say anything. His Royal Highness chess skills were not weak. Presumably, losing 10 games in a row had already caused him to lose a lot of face. He was too embarrassed to have any further contact with that blind chess master. Su Fengnian said without reason, "Let's see how King of Jing and Zhao Heng's gambling luck is." Su Fengnian suddenly said with a bitter face, "It's over. Laozi's gambling luck is so bad today. My loss is another gain. Zhao Heng, that old turtle, is most likely going to make a lot of money." Yu Yuwei asked doubtfully, "What's wrong?" Su Fengnian muttered a few curses but didn't say anything. In Yongzi Alley, the young blind chess master struggled to carry his luggage. It was only 2 boxes of chess pieces and a few chess manuals, but he was already exhausted. The blind chess master silently mocked himself for being a useless scholar. He walked a few steps and raised a warm smile. 10 games in Yongzi Alley. He had earned a total of 100 copper coins. In the past 2 years in Yongzi Alley, other than deliberately showing weakness, he had never really lost a game. The local chess lovers in Xiangfan were no longer willing to let him gamble. Only some foreign guests who came to Yongzi Alley to play would take the bait. Therefore, earning 100 copper coins a day was a rare good situation. Moreover, that young master was extremely interesting. His family background was naturally excellent. He was blind but not blind. Such a young master with a superior family background was actually good at chess. In these years, it was very difficult for him to spend time and effort to play chess. When he was young, he was happy to win and was even happier to lose. Now that he had been winning and never losing, his interest in playing chess had decreased. He was afraid that one day he would really play chess just to make a living. If that day really came, it would be the day when his chess skills stopped. Thinking of his bleak background, the blind chess master's face was cold, as if he had forgotten how to mourn. In this world it was better to be blind and not look at it. If he could meet a few kind-hearted young masters who played 10 games, perhaps he would regret piercing his own eyes. But after his family declined and he was like a stray dog, in order to survive, he played chess for 10 years. How many people did he meet? When he reached the corner of the alley, the blind chess master was stopped. A dignified voice sounded. "My master wants to see you." The blind chess master calmly said, "I don't want to see him." Not far away, a carriage stopped. In the carriage, a graceful man was holding the record of the blind chess master's background. The ink on the paper had not dried yet. It was obvious that he had just picked up the brush and written it. There were 10 games in Yongzi Alley, and there were no less than hundreds of people watching the game. Even the young chess master who was in the game did not think much of it. He just thought that he was lucky to have met a kind-hearted young master. He did not know that when the first game ended, the news had spread to the most powerful place in Xiangfan City. When the third game was played, the chess master had already sent the servants to thoroughly investigate the identity of the blind chess master. When the 8th game ended, the man in the carriage was still hesitating on how to deal with it. It was not until the 9th game that he saw the young chess master's true chess skills that he smiled and personally left the mansion. He had been patiently waiting until now. When he had the last few pages of the blind chess master's 10 years of gambling records, he felt that he could be more patient. Therefore, when his personal bodyguard outside the carriage said that the blind chess master had disappeared, he was not angry that the blind chess master had eyes but did not recognize Mount Tai. Moreover, the blind chess master was blind.
The man burned a few pages of paper that was nothing more than a few hundred words and a story about the life of an ant.
He then got off his horse and walked to the blind chess player who had a strong character. He slowly said, "Lu Su, from Haichang County, Qingzhou. Your grandfather, Lu Yu, was a Confucian of the previous generation. Your father, Brother Lu, is not bad either. There are 3 heroes in your family. You majored in classics and history. You never thought that when you were writing the history of West Chu, you would say a few words of justice for a scholar. You were almost killed. You stabbed yourself in the eyes and cut off your official career to save your life. For the past 10 years, you have been gambling chess in Yongzi Alley during the day and playing the zither for prostitutes in Xianxia Alley at night. You have earned dirty money. Do you know that your enemy has become the county chief of Haichang County?" The blind chess player calmly said, "This money is not dirty." The middle-aged man smiled and asked, "Regardless of whether the money is dirty or not, let me ask you, do you want to show your talent and not try to make a living in 2 alleys?" The young chess player smiled and said, "Although it is already night, Lu Su still doesn't want to dream." The man laughed and said, "I heard that you once said, 'My generation has thousands of books and tens of thousands of talents, but if I want to sell them, I will only sell them to the royal family.'" The blind chess player frowned and said, "This kind of nonsense that only reads books for a few days and doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. It can't be taken seriously." The man said in a low voice, "But I will take it seriously this time." The blind chess player smiled bitterly and said, "Now that things have come to this, you still won't let go of the Lu family." The man with a string of prayer beads on his hand said calmly, "My surname is Zhao and my name is Hang. The royal family. How can one be considered a royal family? Is one king of Jing'an enough?" In the Prince of Jing'an's residence, heir Zhao Sun was completely baffled as he found his imperial father in the study copying Buddhist scriptures. He quietly asked, "I heard that imperial father brought back a blind chess player carrying a zither? What's the deep meaning?" The king of Jing'an smiled and said, "This person is the last member of the Lu family in Haichang County. In terms of chess, no one in the manor can beat him. You can take care of him since it won't cost much anyway. If he's just a good-for-nothing on the chessboard, you can treat him as a dog that won't bite. If he's really talented, you can take him as an advisor in the manor and polish him. In the future, you can deal with the governor of Haichang County, Yu Hanliang, in front of him, and then he'll be sincere in giving advice. A scholar will die for his bosom friend. This is a principle that the ancients have said so many times. You have to remember it well.
Also, when it comes to getting along with these scholars, you have to put away the method you used to communicate with Wei Wei and his gang of debauches.
Don't rely on your status to oppress others. Not all scholars in the world are stupid. Their minds are the most delicate. Maybe they can't see the big picture, but it's not difficult to see if they're conceited or self-abased. Father will teach you one thing. When dealing with these scholars, you have to treat them as the king of Jing'an and his royal highness. You have to treat them as you treat them as the king of Jing, and Zhao Sun smiled and said, I know.
Father, if you put yourself in their shoes, you already have the heart of Buddha.
The king of Jing'an, Zhao Hang, narrowed his eyes and smiled. I don't need you to flatter me. Zhao Sun carefully left the study. Zhao Heng continued to copy the Buddhist scriptures with a soft brush. When he finished, he said coldly, Lu Su, this king keeps you around because he wants to tell you a story in a few days. This king is so generous. If he doesn't have a bosom friend who has no bearing on the overall situation, it'll be too boring. Chapter 193. When Su Fengnian returned to the inn, he went to Jiang Ni's room since he had nothing to do. He saw an old man and a young man scribbling on the table. There were two small white porcelain bowls, one filled with water and the other with wine. The two of them dipped their fingers in the wine and started scribbling on the table. At this moment, the little clay figurine probably felt that the old god of swords scribbling had crossed the line and invaded her territory. Therefore, she puffed up her cheeks and glared at him. The old god of swords had no choice but to restrain his interest. He lowered his head and sucked all the wine on the table into his mouth. When Jiang and I saw Su Fengnian enter the room, she quickly wiped away the water scribbles on the table with her sleeves. Su Fengnian teased, practicing calligraphy with the old senior? You might as well secretly practice swordsmanship with him. You can't possibly lend out your talisman for free. The old senior can just casually teach you a few moves and you'll be able to throw me 10 streets away. If you accidentally learn green gull sleeves, Teska-sk, the pugilistic world will definitely give you the title of female sword immortal. How impressive would that be? Even Wang Shenji or Dong Tai would have to be polite to you when they meet. When the time comes, you must remember to tell the experts that I, Jiang and I, was once a maidservant of that idiot Su Fengnian. Just thinking about it makes me feel awesome. Jiang and I angrily said, Why do you care if I practice calligraphy? Who wants to be your maidservant? Who wants to practice swordsmanship to give you face? Su Fengnian sat down and mischievously asked, Are you afraid that you won't be able to endure the hardship of practicing swordsmanship? Jiang and I wanted to grab the bowl and smash it.
However, His Royal Highness had already anticipated this and used his winter embroidery knife to stop her hand and the bowl.
He smiled and said, Don't fight. I don't have time to mess around with you today. I'm here to learn from the old senior. If you like to listen, then sit to the side. If you don't, then I'll have to trouble you to take 2 steps forward.
Jiang and I clenched her teeth and said, This is my room.
Su Fengnian ignored the stray cat whose tail had been stepped on.
He summarized the dozen or so moves he had extracted from the numerous secret manuals to the old god of swords.
At first, Li Chungang seemed to be very impatient. He picked at his earwax and flicked it away.
Toward the end of Su Fengnian's narration, although the old man was still crossing his legs, he no longer picked at his earwax to disgust Su Fengnian. He picked up the porcelain bowl that only had half a bowl of wine left and drank as he listened. He did not nod or shake his head. When Su Fengnian saw the drowsy expression on the elderly god of swords' face, he unwillingly dissected it again in detail. He mentioned the names of the books on the origins of the dozen or so styles, and then explained how he believed the dozen or so styles should be connected and integrated. In the end, the elderly god of swords only squinted his eyes and drank the wine. Su Fengnian was a little discouraged. He reached out to pick up the small bowl of ginger used to practice calligraphy and drank the water in one gulp. The little mudman was very vexed that he didn't throw in half a gene of arsenic earlier. Su Fengnian, whose mouth was dry, drank half the bowl of water and stared blankly at the old god of swords who had not moved for a long time. Jiang and I, who did not understand anything, gloated, 3-legged cat. 3-legged cat. Not worthy, not worthy. The word, not worthy, naturally came from the words of the white-clothed guanyin outside Xiangfan City. These days, Jiang and I had been using this to mock His Royal Highness. It was very satisfying. Wang Xianji's age is actually about the same as mine and Qi Xuanzhen's, but in terms of fame, he was many years later. Back then he was also like you, picking up the wisdom of others, taking the inferior path of learning from others. Every time I and some of the experts of that time fought, we could always see this fellow's figure watching the battle from afar. Unlike me, who was stuck between the two realms of celestial phenomenon and immortal for a long time, this old fellow could become more and more valiant as he fought. Now that I think about it, everyone said that Wang Xianji's perception was unparalleled, because he could remember all the martial arts in the world with a single glance after watching a battle once. That was why he was able to break the world's swords with his bare hands. But that wasn't accurate. Wang Xianji was like a Qi practitioner of the Danding sect. He would grab some of the pill stones around him, but not just the pill stones themselves, he would throw them into the cauldron and fuse them together. The old man's two-sleeved green snake would become a one-sleeved green dragon in his hands. Therefore, when the experts of the world fought against Wang Xianji, they all saw him as the best grindstone to sharpen their own cultivation. This was a good thing. Unfortunately, after they sharpened their cultivation, their abilities would improve, but they would never be able to catch up to Wang Xianji's footsteps. That was why countless experts of the world would simultaneously grumble. Since Wang Xianji was born, why did he have to be born? Wang Xianji was like a Qi practitioner of the Danding sect. Young fellow Su, you want to be the second Wang Xianji? Su Fengnian was astonished and speechless. The elderly sword god sneered and said with disdain, since you truly want to practice martial arts and don't even have the ambition to push Wang Xianji down from the second place, why are you still practicing the saber? Su Fengnian said helplessly, if Wang Xianji claims to be the second, who doesn't think that he is the #1 martial artist? The elderly sword god shook his head and smiled faintly. #1? This old man didn't think so. When Wang Xianji claimed to be the second place, half of it was because he was arrogant, and the other half was because he knew his own limitations. There would always be one or two freaks in the world that couldn't be reasoned with. As for whether these freaks came from Buddhism, Taoism, or the mountains and forests of Zhanghai, only the heavens and Wang Xianji himself knew. When Qi Xuanzhen died, this old man thought that Wang Xianji would finally be able to hold his head up high. He didn't expect that Wang Xianji was still the second place. Presumably, after Qi Xuanzhen's death, a terrestrial immortal that even Wang Xianji was afraid of appeared. Otherwise, with Wang Xianji's temper, he wouldn't be so pretentious. This old man felt that this year's martial arts evaluation was trash, but the secondary evaluation wasn't tacky. The 4 people on the rankings all had the hope of giving the martial arts world a surprise before Wang Xianji died of old age. Especially the new Wudong patriarch and dragon tiger Qi Xianxia, who fought on the Wudong mountain and almost destroyed the Zhenwu heavenly empire. The latter had the demeanor of this old man back in the day. The bull riding that you mentioned was like Qi Xuanzhen, who didn't make a sound, but when he farted, the entire world would pinch their nose to smell it. As for you, young fellow, you are quite similar to Wang Xianji. It's a pity that Wang Xianji was a late bloomer. At your age, he could casually kill dozens of Su Fengnian. Zhang and I chuckled at the side and said, that's amazing. You're quite similar to Wang Xianji. Doesn't that mean that when you reach Wang Xianji's age, you can be ranked as the top 200 experts in the world? Su Fengnian was amused by the little mudman's words and laughed out loud. He turned his head and said, thanks for your auspicious words. I will definitely live to 100 years old. No matter what, I will live to Wang Xianji's age. Zhang and I was vexed and didn't say anything. Su Fengnian laughed and said, in the future, when I roam the martial arts world and meet an expert that I don't like, the first thing I will ask is if he is the top 200 expert in the world. The old god of swords waved his hand and said, go, go. This old man still needs to practice calligraphy with little Zhang. Su Fengnian was chased out of the room just like that. When he closed the door, he didn't forget to extend his 2 hands to Zhang and I. 1 finger on each hand meant that he would live to 100 years old, and 2 fingers on each hand meant that he was the top 200 expert in the world. Seeing this, Zhang and I was furious. After he closed the door, he said in a fit of pique, I'm not practicing calligraphy anymore. The old god of swords, who had suffered an unexpected calamity, was stunned and said, why not? Zhang and I said angrily, I'm not in the mood. The old man had a sneaky face and softly urged, little Zhang, Try imagining that this table is little Sue's smiling face. Zhang and I hesitated for a moment and her eyes lit up. She jogged over and hurriedly poured another bowl of water.
Following that, she practiced calligraphy. Every word was written with iron and silver hooks.
At this moment, the old god of swords somewhat understood why little Sue liked to tease the little girl in front of him.
Li Chungang held the bowl and drank a big mouthful of wine. He was even more determined to make a deal with little Sue. Looking at Zhang and I practicing calligraphy, he softly whispered and kindly reminded, "Sword and calligraphy are the same. The most important thing is to be done in one go. Little mud man, come, come, come. You read this old man's calligraphy."
Zhang and I made no sound and looked at the old man's fingers. She silently recited, "Traveling to the East Sea in the morning and the West Mountain in the evening, the green snake in my sleeve is bold.
When I meet injustice, I put down my cup and draw my sword, treating it as air. I shout 3 times and rush over, only to see heads falling from the sky. The world thinks I'm climbing the stairs, but I've already passed the 18th floor."
When the old god of swords was writing freely, he saw that Zhang and I was not only reading, but also writing on the table without realizing it.
Her fingers were not only similar to the poem he wrote on the table, but also similar in spirit. I don't practice the sword, so the sword will is naturally sufficient. Although there is no sword in my sleeves, the green snake is bold.
After the old god of swords entered the world with a broken arm, this was the first time he drank wine. The sword will in the room was awe-inspiring. It was impossible to tell whose hand it was. Yu Wei lay lazily on the table.
The white cat squatted in front of her and curled up like a ball of snow. Yu Wei stretched out a finger. Wu Mainyang stretched out her paws and hugged it. She looked naive and cute.
The girl who was no longer the #1 courtesan in Liangzhou smiled and said, "My Mainyang is still the best.
Other than eating and sleeping, you're carefree. When I want to see you, you're by my side. When I don't want to see you, I won't see you. I'm not afraid that you'll hold a grudge." She was no longer the girl who was once called Yu Xuanji. She pressed her cheek against the cool table and reached out to stroke her pet's furry head.
She said to herself, "Do you want to leave me and live alone?"
Since Wu Mainyang was destined to be unable to speak, she answered her own question. "Even if I wanted to at first, I wouldn't think about it after I got used to it, right? I know it's not right, but I can't leave or escape, right? You're just a flower vase, and the kind that's not very good looking. What's there to be dissatisfied about being able to live? You can't compare to the maids in the yard, you can't compare to those heroines who roam Jianghu alone, you can't compare to a child who dares to hate with a dagger. You can't compare to anyone. You've even forgotten your parents and even your name. Who can you compare to? Who's worth talking to when you're like this?
You'll grow old eventually." Outside, His Royal Highness leaned against the door in silence.
Chapter 194.
Tao can't be Tao, Zen can't participate. Life is as lonely as an avalanche.
Master, you're sad again. Stupid Nanbei, when you have a wife one day, you'll be like this too. Sigh, it must be that Master's wife went down the mountain to buy rouge again. Master, why do you keep sharpening the kitchen knife these days? It's sharpened so that it can cut people. What? Master, don't take it too hard. We're already monks. If we take it too hard, what should we do with those Buddhist believers who go up the mountain to burn incense? Although Master's wife and things always like to spend money. It has nothing to do with your Master's wife. Oh, that's good. Then which abbot is not pleasing to the eye? I think Abbot Hui Guang is quite easy to beat, but it's not good to use a knife. Master, let's follow the old rules. It won't hurt the harmony. Ah, not Abbot Hui Guang? It's for that kid surnamed Su. Ah, why? Su Fengnian is quite a good person. This bastard dares to snatch my daughter. If I don't chop him, who should I chop? Master, disciple wants to recite scriptures. What are you afraid of? With your little ability, I've let you snatch things for so many years, but I haven't seen you snatch them away. Besides, if I chop you, who will do the laundry and cook? Nanbei, Dongbei and Dongbei talk about that kid every day. Don't you have any opinions? No. Taking in such a stupid disciple like you, it's really Buddha's fault. Aren't you afraid that things will run away with him? Don't cry to Master then. Hey, it's definitely Master who cries harder.
Master, if one day I really become a Buddha and burn a Saraira, will this thing be sad?
Nanbei, go and cook first. We'll think about this problem after we're full, okay?
Master, why are you always the first to admit your mistakes when you quarrel with Master's wife? It doesn't matter if some things are right and some things are wrong. Do you understand?
I don't really understand.
For example, you're right about liking things, so... Master, don't say any more, I understand.
And
how come your perception is even better than Master's now? Heh, so this is the Zen that your disciple cultivates. North and South, haven't you seen a girl prettier than things since you left the mountain?
Remember, monks don't lie.
No.
Not bad.
Master, why did you mention the wine gourd?
If you answer yes, you'll know why.
Master, other than that thing and mistress, who else are you afraid of? The abbot of our temple has lived for more than 150 years.
Master is afraid that he won't give us the copper coins. Outside the temple?
That's all.
Master, monks don't lie. Allow Master to think about it.
Oh, there really is one.
Back then, he fought with your master's wife over your master. They quarreled with each other. Fortunately, Master's fists were stronger than his.
I believe that in the entire world, that old hooligan would only dare not come to our temple.
Old hooligan?
Wait a minute, what do you mean by snatching Master from Master's wife?
Let bygones be bygones.
Everyone in Xianxia City knew that the most seductive woman in Qingzhou lived in Xianxia Alley. She was clearly a prostitute who had fallen into the secular world, but no one dared to treat her as a prostitute.
Her name was Li Baisher. Her real name was Li Xiaoru.
Her ancestors were from a third-class official family in Dongyue. Although the country was not destroyed, her father's generation was not good at management. After his death, he left a mess for his young children. Li Baisher followed her wet nurse to Xiling Lake in Guangling to make a living by selling her ancestral property. She lived in a small building in the pine forest and enjoyed the scenery. She grew up into a beautiful girl with an extraordinarily exquisite figure. Every time she went out, there would always be many handsome young men following her. Later, in order to avoid being forcibly abducted by a fierce general under Lord Guangling's command, she wandered thousands of miles to Xianxia City in Qingzhou. She first became a Taoist nun, then entered Xianxia Alley. With her proficiency in music, singing, and observing people's expressions, she quickly became a famous prostitute in the 3 provinces. She was especially good at singing and dancing in her hometown, Xiling. She was known as the most beautiful woman in the world. This time, she was the only woman who was listed as a prostitute in the Rouge Review. The title of the most beautiful woman in the world was also affirmed. This made all the men in Xianxia City who had visited brothels feel very satisfied. After all, the Rouge Review was more convincing than the 4 top 10 courtesans. However, it was said that Li Baisher was not in a good mood recently because all the Taoist priests in Xianxia City seemed to have left the city overnight. It seemed that the Taoist ancestral court, Mount Longhu, had made a bet with the Buddhist sect before the grand heavenly ritual. Now it seemed that Mount Longhu had lost. Mount Longhu had the 4 great celestial masters in charge? How could they lose? For a time, rumors spread in the streets. People had different opinions. Some said that they saw a female bodhisattva dressed in a snow-white monk's robe that led thousands of ghosts out of the city that night. Some said that Mount Longhu did not lose. It was just that the Taoist priests had to go to Mount Longhu to receive merit after 10 years of transcendence from the demons. For some reason, when people talked about the white-robed monk, they talked about the white-clothed imperial advisor of the past. He was a living bodhisattva who made hundreds of thousands of people in the capital kneel to him. Then there was the rumor that the crown prince of Bailiang had entered the city. These days, the people of Xianxia City had endless topics to talk about. Business in the taverns and tea houses was unusually good. All of Xianxia City knew about the Jade White Lion, Li Xianxia. They also knew that she had a young blind man who never showed up when he played the zither. Early in the morning, the blind chess player who had moved into the Jing and Palace yesterday arrived at the Jade White Lion Pavilion in the middle of Xianxia Alley. Unlike the past where he carried the zither in the night, he was empty-handed this time. The little servant who was in charge of the back door of the brothel woke up sleepily and squatted on the stone steps at the entrance. When Li Huakui's Guqin master arrived, he immediately jumped up and put on a smiling face. His smiling face was filled with more sincerity than usual when he was welcoming guests. Young Master Lu played the guqin in the White Jade Lion Pavilion, and the hundreds of people in the pavilion knew that he had an exceptionally good temper, extremely high character, and extremely elegant temperament. He was able to converse with anyone in a cultured and refined manner. Some of the real gold and silver that he received as a reward would always be given away by young Master Lu before they left the pavilion, leaving only a few copper coins for himself. Therefore, the little doorkeeper who had spat on this blind guqin master in the past always boasted that he and young Master Lu had become friends after exchanging blows. He was even more attentive to the blind guqin master, who did not bring along his guqin today. The little servant said happily, "Young Master Lu, I've remembered the name I asked you to teach me last time."
Lu Su smiled slightly.
The young servant with a delicate face said kindly, "The fairy sisters in the Red Fish Pavilion all like to wake up late.
Young Master Lu, you'll have to be patient and wait for a while when you get there." Chapter 195.
Lu Su, who was blind but knew the way, nodded and said, "I know. I'll go alone and won't trouble Brother Song." The servant nodded with a smile and went back the way he came. When the blind zither player arrived in front of the Red Fish restaurant, he encountered many female servants and maids who had woken up early in the morning to do their chores. The orioles and swallows happily called out to young Master Lu a few times before they stopped. Those who were more daring than the other ladies in the restaurant even teased Lu Su a few times, purposely asking this young master for advice on the meaning of a pear tree suppressing begonia, or a palm print seen in front of Mount Huaiyue. The blind zither player had no choice but to beg for mercy, provoking even more coquettish laughter. This young Master Lu, who spoke in a refined manner and had a gentle temperament, was initially very inconspicuous in the White Jade Lion restaurant where the sons of the rich and powerful were more common than cabbages. If not for Master Li Shuangjia's high opinion of him, who would even spare a glance at him? In the second year after entering the restaurant, he was playing the zither when he bumped into a famous rich and powerful man in the city who was forcing himself on a young girl. Although the Jade White Lion restaurant had more rules than the average brothel, the people did not fight with the officials. It was only a young girl, so there was no need to fall out with the local tyrant. The man, whose ancestors were the leaders of the Qingzhou army for several generations, forced himself on the young girl in the corridor and wanted to kill her. The blind zither player did not care about his own safety and rushed forward with his family's zither. He did not hit the evil man but was stepped on by the guards instead. It was a farce until Li Baisher personally intervened and saved the blind zither player's life. Many people in the White Jade Lion Tower still remembered Lu Su, who was covered in blood, sitting in the corridor with the pitiful dead girl in his arms. He took off his shabby clothes and gently covered the disheveled corpse. Today, the Red Fish restaurant somehow knew that Lu Su was coming. Li Shuangjia's personal maid, Qi Fu, was already standing at the door to welcome him. Seeing the blind zither player, she smiled gently and said, "Young Master Lu, Miss is already waiting." Lu Su shook his head and said, "Today, I just want to tell the Red Fish restaurant that I won't be playing the guqin in the future. Miss Li lent me the ancient guqin to paint a dragon. I want to pay back some of the money I earn every month. Miss praying, I won't enter the restaurant and disturb Miss Li." The beautiful maidservant, whose status in the White Jade Lion Pavilion was even higher than some of the red plaques, sighed regretfully. She bowed slightly to the blind zither player, and then turned to walk into the courtyard. By the window on the second floor stood a beautiful woman. Qi Fu was already considered a rare beauty in Xiangfan, but compared to the woman upstairs, she lost all her color. What was even more inconceivable was that behind the world's most famous courtesan, the Taoist nun Li Shuangjia, was an old man sitting on a yellow pear-wood chair with his head lowered. He was tuning an arrow. Li Shuangjia waited until Lu Su's figure disappeared before he turned around and asked submissively, "Old ancestor, do you really not need the lion slave to go to the reeds outside the city to meet the Prince of Bailiang?" The old Eru man with grizzled temples just closed his eyes and listened to the music. Logically speaking, Li Baisher was one of the top 10 courtesans in the brothel before the Rouge Review. She had built up a deep relationship with the aristocrats for more than 10 years, and she was almost married to the leader of the Shilin party, Lu Zhonghui. In these years, she had met many poor scholars who were not recognized by their talents, and they were all generous with their money. Some of them were even nobles in the imperial court. It was because of this that Li Baisher's reputation as Jiangnan's double champion came to be. Now that she was on the Rouge Review, she was fully deserving of being the head of the brothel. No one had ever heard of Li Shuangjia being intimate with anyone, and it could even be said that she was still a virgin.
How could she let an old man stay in her room? Could it be that Li Baisher was into this? That was a bit too hardcore. Wouldn't the world be shocked if word got out?
The old era man, who was respectfully called Old Ancestor by Li Xianxia, opened his eyes, but he still didn't speak. Knowing that Old Ancestor didn't like him to talk about this topic, Li Baisher changed the question. Old Ancestor, why do you value a poor boy with a wooden sword so much? The old man raised his head and glanced at the beautiful woman standing in front of the window, but his eyes didn't carry any emotion, and his tone was even colder. This old man plays chess. When he starts, he knows how to end. You're just a flower vase that's pleasing to the eye but not to the heart, so why are you talking nonsense? The rouge woman, Li Xianxia, who had been humiliated to the extreme, didn't have any anger. She became more respectful and subconsciously bent her slender waist. As a result, her chest swelled up so much that it almost burst her clothes. Her body was petite and exquisite, and the scenery on her chest was aggressive. Rumor had it that she had a pair of white lotus jade feet. She had learned Taoist bedroom techniques and tantric mandapa, and could make all kinds of mysterious postures on the bed. Therefore, there was a charming saying of a white jade lion rolling an embroidered ball. This old man bent his finger and plucked a string, saying, Lu Su's chess skills were taught by this old man. This time, he came to the Red Fish restaurant to see if this boy would become arrogant once he achieved success. Fortunately, teaching him chess was not in vain. He knew how to leave some loopholes and still kept the guqin you gave him. Originally, this old man's temperament when he first met him was that he wasn't willing to accept other people's kindness and not return it if he could. Whether or not he can set off a storm will depend on his own luck. The most wonderful thing about a chess piece is that even a brilliant chess player doesn't think that it can become the key to victory or defeat. Li Xianxia lowered her head and said, Old Ancestor's chess skills are naturally the best in the world. The whole world is Old Ancestor's chessboard. The arrow old man turned a deaf ear and said, That boy Bailiang left the city today, so there's nothing for you to do in Xiangfan. Go to the capital. Li Baisher nodded without hesitation and said, Lion slave only listens to Old Ancestor. The old man silently left the Red Fish restaurant. He was going to a private residence in the northeast corner of Xiangfan. Inside, there was a puppet girl that he had personally trained. She was 60% similar to the Princess Pei Nanwei, and 70% similar in spirit. Now the king of Jing and Shitzi Zhao Hang was keeping her as a mistress in a golden house. Every time he went out to pamper her, he would be secretive, afraid that his father king would find out. Zhao Sun thought that his itinerary was flawless, but he didn't know that every time he pampered and trained the girl that he affectionately called Nan Wei, there was an old man standing behind the hole in the wall who looked at the two of them as if they were walking corpses. Zhao Sun's personality was cautious. He had already sent people to investigate the girl's past and background. There was nothing strange about it. Therefore, that private residence was the greatest place for him to enjoy himself in the world. The little beauty was too similar to the girl in the manner that he had to call mother every time he saw her. Every frown, every smile, and even the way she frowned were not far off. Every time he was scolded by his father king in the manor, or after he ran into Wang Fei in the garden, he would come to the private residence to vent. He was extremely affectionate until he was exhausted. After the spring and autumn war ended, it was a brand new game of chess. The old man had already quietly placed 12 pieces. Most of them were still in the process of putting down pieces, but some were about to start. After going to the private residence, the old man immediately left the city and headed for the reed marsh outside Xiangfan, which had the best scenery. Chapter 196. The king of Jing'an and his royal highness, Zhao Sun, had personally escorted them to the Xiangfan city gate. He had gone up the fishing platform and watched them leave. Only then did he take a retainer and make a detour to the private residence where the beauty was hidden. Other than the canary, there was only one servant girl and 2 old nannies. There was no one else idle, not even half a man. Zhao Sun pushed open the door and entered. He immediately felt relaxed and happy. This place was far from the grandeur of the Jing'an palace. It was only a courtyard with 2 entrances, but in the eyes of the heir apparent, it was a paradise on earth that he had found with great difficulty. That strictly ordered prince's manor, that Buddhist hall where Xitigaba Bodhisattva was worshipped, every flower, every blade of grass, every brick, every tile, exuded a gloomy aura that the older he grew, the more unbearable it was. It was suffocating. The man closest to him was so scheming that even his son, Zhao Sun, did not dare to guess.
Zhao Sun resented this man for not ruthlessly killing him back then, sitting on the dragon throne and wearing the dragon robe. He was even more afraid of this man's silent back when he ate vegetarian and chanted Buddhist prayer beads.
But what worried His Royal Highness the most was why this man had married her.
He did not know how to cherish her after marrying her. The husband and wife actually treated each other with respect as cold as ice. When there was something going on, they treated each other like soldiers. It was truly a great irony. Zhao Sun took a deep breath of the unique fresh air of the small courtyard. This place was filled with orchids. These flowers were her favorite. This noble Wang Fei was inferior to the prostitutes in Xianxia Alley. In a year, she only had 2 opportunities to leave the city. Both times, she went to look at the reeds. In spring, she would look at the green shoots of the reeds. In autumn, she would look at the old reeds as the wind blew like snow. Pei Nan Wei, Pei Nan Wei. Just because her name had the word reed in it, she liked to look at the most boring, tedious and weak reeds.
The woman that His Royal Highness raised like a kitten or puppy in the courtyard had been stripped of her name from the first day she came in.
Zhao Sun naturally liked her mutton fat, jade-like body. When he held her in his arms, she had the charm of being warm in winter and cool in summer. But what truly made him crazy was her attitude. When Zhao Sun saw her and respectfully said that Xianxia had come to greet him, she just snorted coldly and haughtily, and Zhao Sun's bones immediately lightened. They were too similar. Zhao Sun gave a sinister smile and scolded, "You whore, Pei Nan Wei. Who asked you to pretend to be virtuous in front of me?"
Then, without another word, he rushed up and tore apart her clothes that were exactly the same as Pei Nan Wei's. He carried her to the large bed in the inner residence and fiercely whipped her.
After making love, Zhao Sun returned to normal. He lay on the bed with his eyes closed and enjoyed the fake Wang Fei's kneading of his shoulders. He said regretfully, "Your skin and figure are still a bit lacking. Normally, your voice is almost authentic. But once you're in bed, it's still a fly in the ointment. Be more careful next time. If you're still exposed like this the next time." The woman sitting on the bed used a nasal voice to make a sound of acknowledgement.
Zhao Sun raised his head and glanced at her.
He grabbed her silky hair and pressed her head under his crotch.
He said darkly and violently, "Good way, I've missed your little mouth so much that I've gone crazy."
2 bodies entwined in pleasure.
Zhao Sun put on an outer robe and lay on the sandalwood floor under the eaves of the room.
He quietly looked at a string of wind chimes that didn't move even though there was no wind. At this time, the king of Jing and Xianxia was really like a gentle and kind young master. He was aloof from worldly affairs, harmless, and had a scholarly temperament. The fake Wang Fei knelt beside Zhao Sun and accompanied this madman to look at the wind chimes. In reality, when Zhao Sun was quiet and silent, he was a very amiable young man.
She saw that he was in a daze and then had the chance to look at the handsome face that was said to be 90% similar to the king of Jing An's.
Zhao Sun stared at the elegant wind chimes that were made from a string of broken jade pieces. He laughed softly and said, "Is it beautiful? She will never look at me like this in this lifetime. She doesn't even look at my father, much less me, a Xianxia who doesn't even have a hereditary title."
The king of Jing closed his eyes in His Royal Highness and murmured, "I really envy those commoners."
Zhao Sun left. Before he left, he slapped her across the face. The reason was that she had peeked at him under the eaves. The fake Wang Fei, whose cheeks were red and swollen, carefully lay down where the Xianxia had been. She didn't hold a trace of hatred. She just looked up at the wind chimes like him. The sound of the wind chimes was ethereal and pleasing to the ear. She suddenly sat up and looked at an old man who was sitting on the railing. She was filled with respect from the bottom of her heart. She had been shocked by the king of Jing and Xianxia. When she first entered the small courtyard, she had been whipped many times. If she did anything wrong, she would be slapped across the face. When she went to bed, she was humiliated in all sorts of ways. However, she wasn't afraid of any of this. Sometimes when she hugged His Royal Highness and listened to him sob in the dead of night, she would feel a kind of sadness. Only the old man in front of her, who had never been rough, made her fear him to the bone. The old man, who had been elusive all these years, asked softly, "Have you fallen in love with this pitiful creature born in a noble family?" The fake Wang Fei crawled on the ground, her delicate body trembling. The old man smiled faintly and said, "No matter. That Zhao Sun isn't an idiot. If you don't give him some sincerity, he will get tired of you sooner or later." Kneeling on the ground, she was finally able to breathe. She raised her head and looked with puzzlement at the old man who was half immortal and half demon to her. She said that he was an immortal, that he calculated everything. Almost every step of Zhao Sun's was within the old man's expectations. But the more it was like this, the more she felt terrified. She had originally imitated Princess Pei better, but the old man didn't allow it. He only told her to act more skillfully each time. Thinking about it now, she finally understood that if she had acted perfectly from the beginning, the king of Jing and Xianxia wouldn't have been willing to come here so often. Was the old man's skill at manipulating people's hearts to the point of perfection? What kind of person would scheme so hard against a vassal king? The old man looked at the string of broken jade wind chimes. He had asked the fake Wang Fei to hang them. Sure enough, Zhao Sun liked them very much. He liked them beyond imagination. The old man chuckled softly and said, "Up, down, left, right, I am hollow. No matter east, west, north, south or east, they all say the same. Ding ding dong ding dong." The fake Wang Fei didn't dare to speak. The old man stood up and smiled. "Whether you and that poor fool's luck is good or bad depends on today. It's a pity you can't see it." The old man left with his hands behind his back. Before he left, he indifferently left behind a prophecy. In the future, when you see the furious king of Jing'an, just try your best to put in a good word for Zhao Sun. Maybe it will save your life. The fake Wang Fei was stupefied. The wind blew again, and the wind chimes rang again. Ding ding dong dong ding 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 dong. There was no longer any otherworldly feeling, only a murderous aura. Mount Wudong was lively because a bastard had come. This bastard came from Mount Longhu and was tolerated. But he actually fought with the young martial granduncle who was expected to be the leader. How was it? Were you beaten? Chapter 197. The reed marsh outside Xiangfan City originally did not have the beautiful autumn scenery, but ever since Princess Consort Jingan fell in love with it, the people of Xiangfan who would come every autumn to chop the reeds for firewood or to make paper pulp automatically disappeared without a trace. Fortunately, Princess Consort Pei had a bodhisattva's heart. Every year, she would subsidize the nearby villagers with some silver taels. In addition, with her presence, the scholars in the city commented on the scenic spots of the reed marsh, such as the fragrance of the reeds and the green lake. The memorial archway of the Sky Wave Gate was written by a calligraphy expert 2 years ago. As time went on, he took advantage of the opportunity to let the rich wanderers enjoy the scenery, and earned a considerable amount of silver. However, Princess Pei usually only went for a stroll in the spring or autumn to see the snow. This year, she clearly came a little earlier. She always left the city with a very small fanfare. Other than her 2 personal maids, there was only a small group of lightly armored guards. King of Jing and Zhao Heng had governed Xiangfan effectively these years. He loved the people like his own children and had a good reputation. In addition, he was known far and wide that this vassal king was a devout believer of Buddhism. Therefore, when Wang Fei left the city, she had never encountered any trouble. From the official road to a small road, there was a lush reed marshes. In the past few years, Wang Fei had always admired the scenery. After she got off the carriage, she would let the guards follow her from a distance. The guards did not dare to disturb Wang Fei's mood. In addition, the reeds were taller than a person. At least, Wang Fei did not get off the carriage. But this time it was strange. Not only did she come early, Wang Fei still did not get off the carriage when she reached the fork in the road. Inside the carriage, Princess Pei, who did everything personally in the Fu, personally lit a small incense burner. She sat in a kneeling position, her buttocks on her legs, imperceptibly squeezing out a full curve. The 2 servant girls in the carriage, even though they were both women, were moved when they saw this scene. Wang Fei especially had a head of unusually soft and beautiful black hair. When the servant girls combed it, they gently held it in their hands and couldn't help but praise it. Wang Fei, who had a gentle personality, would look at herself in the bronze mirror and smile gently. When the servant girls occasionally washed Wang Fei's white lotus jade feet after she was tired from studying, their hearts would beat faster and they would sigh that Wang Fei was really too beautiful. Princess Pei held a letter in her hand. Before she left the Fu, King of Jing and Zhao Heng had given it to her. He said that it was best to personally hand it to the Bailiang Xianxia at the reed marshes. Otherwise, she would not have come to the reed marshes so early. Princess Pei held the letter that had not been carefully sealed,
as if she was hesitating whether or not she should take out the letter. When it came to King of Jing and Zhao Hang, there was no one in the world who understood him better than she did. He did not say anything, and he did nothing. He left things for others to guess. His Royal Highness, Zhao Sun's eccentric personality had been forced out by his father. As for Zhao Sun's unconventional and covert gaze, how could Princess Pei, who was no longer an ignorant young girl, not know about it? That child most likely hated her a little more. Although when he entered Princess Jing'an's service, Zhao Sun's birth mother, at the time, had died of an illness for unknown reasons. This debt, no matter how clear Pei Nanwei's conscience was, would be on her head. Therefore all these years when faced with Zhao Sun's unconventional and complicated gaze, she had never exposed him, never reprimanded him, and never said anything in front of the King of Jing, and Zhao Hang placed great importance on maintaining his health. When the King of Jing'an died, Zhao Sun would inherit the title of Marquis of Jing'an. No matter what, it would still be 20 years later. Presumably at that time Zhao Sun, who had been demoted to Marquis of Jing'an by law, would not have any thoughts about her old and faded self. Other than the secret letter in Pei Nanwei's hand, there was also a sandalwood box with prayer beads by her leg. She liked the carvings on the sandalwood box very much. The box had never been opened because she knew that the more she cared about something, the more Zhao Hang hated it. Also, this sandalwood box had been given to her as a thorn in Zhao Hang's side. She was afraid that if she opened it and he found out, the prayer beads and the sandalwood box would both be gone. Princess Pei said in a gentle voice, "Go down and see if Beiliang and His Royal Highness are near." The two servant girls, who had to report to the King of Jing and what Wang Fei ate 3 meals a day, withdrew and slowly lifted their skirts to get off the carriage. Princess Pei took out the secret letter with 2 fingers. It was the King of Jing'an's personal handwriting. Sending nephew 1,000 li. Princess Pei furrowed her brow and muttered, "The meaning is that even if you send him 1,000 li, he still has to part in the end? He's not going to personally send him off?" Princess Pei shook her head as though she felt that she didn't understand the meaning of these words. After Zhao Hang had failed to seize power in the palace, he didn't have a high opinion of the top nobility in the court and was even ridiculed by Su Xiao and the other powerful vassals. But she knew that this was a man with great ambition. If he didn't hate the humiliation he had suffered in the past, if he didn't want to return to that city and that palace, then this vassal king who was as ambitious as the reeds outside the window, when Shitzi Zhao Sun was beaten, he had to personally come and ask for forgiveness. This was already a great endurance. It was really a broken jar. Once again, he lowered himself to express his feelings of parting with a junior. Pei Nanwei couldn't help but think of the words he had said with a smile as he stood at the top of the steps when they left the Fu. This king has a clear conscience. We are fated to be husband and wife, and I have already prayed for you 1,000,000 times. Chapter 198. Pei Nanwei put the secret letter back into the envelope and lowered her head to look at the sandalwood box. She pulled aside the curtain and saw that the servant girls were still waiting on the road. She unconsciously reached out to touch the sandalwood box, but as soon as she touched it, she suddenly retracted her hand as if she had been scalded. This Wang Fei was vexed and in a fit of pique. She fiercely grabbed the sandalwood box and threw it against the inner wall of the carriage. The sandalwood box fell to the ground and a string of simple prayer beads rolled out. Pei Nanwei did not believe in Buddhism, nor did she believe in Elder Huang's teachings. It was just that she was born in a noble family and had seen and learned a lot in Jing'an Palace. She was satisfied with this string of Pa Luo beads that had the reputation of crown prince in the Central Plains. It was love at first sight. Women were fickle. She had just thrown away the sandalwood box, and now she picked up the prayer beads with pity in her eyes. Leaning against the wall of the carriage, she held a round ivory crown prince. Pei Nanwei raised her head and looked at it in a daze. In the eyes of the common people, as the princess consort, Qingzhou was hers, Xiangfan was hers, and the reeds outside the window were hers. They all said it was hers, but what was the truth? Just like how the common people would never know about the intrigue in the imperial palace, all of this was not hers. Pei Nanwei thought of her carefree childhood. She thought of the grandeur when she first entered the Wangfu. She thought of the cold face of the first Wang Fei. She thought of the gloominess that Zhao Sun had learned from Zhao Hang. She thought of the absurdity when she left the inn by Shouyang Lake. When she heard the rumbling of horse hooves, she finally thought of the secret letter. She remembered the parting words of the King of Jing'an, who had helped her grow old together, like an elegiac couplet. Pei Nanwei was frightened and threw away the prayer beads. Her face was like a patch of bleak snow-white reeds in autumn.
How was this sending her 1,000 li? It was clearly sending her to the Yellow Springs. A young man was lying on the railing at the top of the memorial archway for Tian Bo Kai Jing. The breeze stirred up the reeds and gently blew the hair on his temples. He was in a very leisurely mood. He believed himself to be a very optimistic young man, never complaining about the heavens or blaming others. When he was young, he was alone with his mother and suffered from all the supercilious looks. When she died of illness and became as thin as a ghost, he was only 9 years old. Before his mother died, she said a lot of things that he didn't understand at the time. The general meaning was that she didn't regret giving birth to him, and didn't hate the father he had never met. Later, he personally dug a grave and buried his mother. Although he was young, he understood that she hoped to see that person for the last time, even if it was just a glance, but she didn't. When he was thinking about how to not starve to death, a tall and sturdy man with a sharp voice appeared. His voice was the complete opposite of his figure. He was dressed in luxurious clothes that he had never seen before. He looked extremely beautiful, but he always gave people the feeling that he was wearing a luxurious human skin. At such a young age, he already felt like he had seen a man-eating demon. However, the man only held his hand and said that he would take him home. Home. His mother was gone. Where was home? Then he was taken to a city with very high walls. Through the curtain of the carriage, he was dumbfounded. After getting off the carriage, the guy who didn't speak to him led him through countless city gates. Finally, they arrived at a lake. On the lakeside, there stood a man who looked very much like him. He was golden in color and had snakes crawling all over his body. Later, he finally knew that it was not a snake, but a dragon. The man who didn't say anything and didn't show any expression after meeting him was wearing a dragon robe. After that, he had 2 cheap masters. In addition to the man who took him home, the other was an old monk who didn't like to smile. The former had a very good temper. When he saw the man covered in ferocious yellow snakes at the lakeside, he was scared to tears. When the man who would become his great master in the future led him back, he squatted down and whispered to him not to be afraid. After she grew up, she remembered that no matter how mischievous her great master Han was, he would only smile at her. It was as if he could do nothing but smile. In that vast and boundless family, everyone would be scared to death when they saw him. During the Mid-Autumn Festival when he was 12 years old, he secretly went to the Hall of Martial Heroes to admire the moon. He was caught and almost beheaded. It was his great master who knelt in front of the man and begged for mercy. Only then did he know that his great master not only knew how to smile, but he also knew how to kneel in front of people. After that, no one stopped him from going to the Hall of Martial Heroes. He could go anywhere he wanted. Second Master's temper was much worse. He always had countless feather dusters. He talked to him about Buddhism and said that he would be beaten if he lost. He clearly said that he would be beaten if he won. However, there was one time when he touched Second Master's bald head while he was in a daze. Second Master didn't get angry. In fact, before he turned 20, the truth had already been revealed. However, he didn't want to fight over this and that. Besides, even if he fought, he might not be able to win. So what if his biological father was that person? He was tired of staying in that family where everyone was outwardly united but inwardly divided. In addition, he didn't like that naughty girl Xueqi. They fought and scolded each other every 2 to 3 days. So, he simply went to Xianxia Academy to enjoy himself. Among the women in the world, he only liked those who were ugly but very attractive. His mother was like that. Even though she was terminally ill and didn't look good, her eyes still made him feel the most intimate. Finally, he had a chance to see the girl with a bad temper. He climbed over the wall and entered the small building. As expected, he was stabbed by a sword. Later, he had no choice but to agree to 10 rounds on the lake. If he lost, he lost. Who said that men must win over women? He was very happy to serve his wife for the rest of his life. He wanted her to be comfortable and happy for the rest of her life, without the slightest ripple. Unfortunately, every time he secretly went to her place to feed the chickens and ducks, he couldn't escape being chased away by the sword. He didn't care. After all, she was his wife. Wasn't it natural for her to be petty and throw a tantrum with her husband? At the feet of this optimistic young man stood 4 talisman generals in red armor. The water armor had already been broken by an old god of swords who had returned to Zhonghu. Although his heart ached, he endured it because the old god of swords was working hard for his brother-in-law. He didn't even mind leaving a water armor talisman armor behind. Since he had more or less done his duty, it was time to get down to business. The main reason he sneaked out of the academy this time was to deliver a message to the king of Jing and Zhao Hang. The meaning was that the inheritance had nothing to do with Zhao Hang. However, as long as he was willing to help, the Bailiang's share would be given to him. The king of Jing'an was a very smart man. In the past, he didn't have enough courage. This time he learned to be smart. Once he made a move, he made a big move. The young man sat up and hung his feet on the archway. He looked over and finally saw the dust on the official road. He smiled and said, "Brother-in-law, don't blame your future brother-in-law for not being loyal. You must know that the feng shui of this place is excellent." Chapter 199. A green-robed traveler came from the southwest, carrying a thin bamboo pole on his shoulder. After a while, he took down the pole to stir the reeds. He was reciting a folk song, "I'm here to patrol the mountains on behalf of the king, and if I see a girl, I'll go to the stockade together." He repeated the song a few times and even jumped a few times. He did not see the scene he wanted to see and was bored to death. He picked up the pole again and asked without turning his head, "Do you think I can block Li Chuangong's sword on the river?" There was no reply. He was not discouraged and continued to say, "At that time, I thought the old god of swords had broken and then stood up again, stepping into the realm of earth immortal in one fell swoop. Only after I left the martial arts evaluation did I realize that it was just a coincidence of the right time, place and people. It was nothing special. When you and I came out of the sword tomb, my sword and yours both touched the threshold of sword immortal. What do you think are our chances of winning against the old senior this time?" There was still no sound behind the green-robed traveler who did not have a sword and only had a bamboo pole. Or rather, there was only the endless sound of the wind blowing the reeds. It was this thin green-robed traveler who flipped the big boat at the gate of hell with his pole. He came and went in a carefree manner with a small boat under his feet. In the well-informed Wulin world, he had been talked about enthusiastically. The old god of swords had just returned and the new sword crown of the Wu family had come to challenge him. No matter how one looked at it, it was very amusing. Recently, he had earned countless pounds of saliva from the people of Jianghu. However, the low-level Jianghu heroes and heroes of the forest were only shocked by this swordsman's invincibility all the way to the south. Some people were already inquiring about who was qualified to be Wu Liuding's sword attendant. However, the sword tomb of the Wu family was a strange place that did not leak anything. They could only vaguely know that the sword attendant of this generation's sword crown Wu Liuding was even more outstanding than the previous generation. To become a sword attendant of the sword tomb, it was needless to say that he was loyal and devoted to the sword master. He was destined to never serve another master. All the sword attendants were chosen by the older generation of swordsmen to be the direct descendants of the Wu family. They grew up together, learned the sword, and picked the sword together. Every generation of the sword tomb had dozens of pairs of sword masters and sword attendants. Only by becoming a sword-crowned swordsman could they represent the sword tomb of the Wu family. The new sword-crowned strength was unquestionable. The sword attendants who were naturally shrouded in a tragic aura were even more curious. In addition, in this tomb where countless sword geniuses were buried, there was a tradition that the sword attendants were stronger than the sword master. Who knew what kind of tyrannical sword technique Wu Liuding's mysterious sword attendant practiced? Thus, those hidden powers who did not like the sword tomb and thought that they were the only family in the world had to think carefully before they could guarantee that nothing would go wrong. They did not dare to rashly seize the edge of the sword tomb. The sword master practiced the sword of the king, and the sword attendants practiced the tyrannical sword technique. This was a written rule engraved on the sword steel of the sword tomb's ancestors. In terms of killing with the sword, there was no swordsman more powerful than the sword attendants of the Wu family. The green-robed Wu Liuding sighed with emotion. "The two of us are a perfect match. When I was young, I was unwilling to follow my grandfather to learn the art of outer king and inner sage. I always felt that with the old ancestor's talent, he only obtained the title of Su of Gojosian, and was unable to become the king of my family's swordsmanship. Then why would I learn the sword of the king? I would rather practice the tyrannical sword technique of entering the world with my aunt. As for you, by chance, you were bestowed with the sword of the king when you were young. Even my grandfather's sword, Su of Gojosian, was retrieved for me from the sword mountain. I entered the world to practice the sword technique of entering the world, but your sword technique of entering the world had to accompany me into the world. I've wronged you.
The king of Jing and said that my aunt's great Liang dragon sparrow is in the hands of that person. I don't care about the schemes of the imperial court, but that sword, no matter what, I will retrieve it for you.
Finally, a slender figure appeared behind Wu Lu Ding.
She carried a long sword on her back that was filled with awe-inspiring sword qi even without being unsheathed.
She was dressed like Wu Lu Ding in a scholar's green robe. Her appearance was ordinary, but she was particularly angular.
Between her eyebrows, there was a murderous spirit. The ancient sword, Su of Gojoseon, was the second most famous sword in the world. It suppressed the 160,000 swords buried in the sword tomb. The woman with the sword on her back, who should not be blind, kept her eyes closed as she walked. A cool breeze brushed past her face, blowing her hair that was roughly tied into a ponytail with a red string. Wu Lu Ding, who was carrying a bamboo pole, turned around and smiled mischievously. Xueqi, why do I like you even though I know that you're not good-looking? The young woman with the sword on her back and her eyes closed answered seriously. It's probably because you like to eat the pickled cabbage I make. You like me because you're afraid that there won't be any pickled cabbage to eat. She was famous for not being good with words in the Wu family's sword tomb since she was young. Other than practicing the sword, she practiced the sword again and again. Apart from that, her only interest was making pickled cabbage. Wu Lu Ding had been craving this since he was young. Unfortunately, this craving lasted for so many years. She was born poor. Before she was brought into the Wu family's sword tomb, she was the daughter of a village barbarian. Probably because her memories of the past were limited to the taste of pickled cabbage, she tried to make pickled cabbage after entering the sacred ground in the hearts of sword practitioners. As for whether the taste was good or not, there was no comparison, so naturally there was no answer. In any case, they grew up together. To be precise, Wu Lu Ding, who grew up together with bamboo swords, never got tired of eating pickled cabbage. Her rigid answer might be preposterous in the ears of outsiders, but Wu Lu Ding listened attentively and seriously pondered this question. Xueqi's pickled cabbage. Was there anything more delicious than this in the world? Moreover, when Xueqi didn't mention the sword and was seriously making pickled cabbage, she, who didn't look too good, always looked better. Xueqi, if I die in Li Chuangong's hands today, then from now on, there's no need to offer wine every tomb sweeping day. I don't really like to drink. Just make a big pot of pickled cabbage. Okay. A sword attendant served the swordmaster, but there was no rule of avenging the swordmaster. When facing an enemy, they were not allowed to help. There was only the custom of burying the sword and guarding the grave. The Wu family's ancestor set this iron rule in the past, afraid that the younger generation would have something to rely on and delay the pure sword heart that sought the Tao alone. Xueqi, can pickled cabbage only be used for pickled cabbage? I only know how to pickle cabbage. Let's change the taste. We're already in the south. Wu Lu Ding drooled with a face full of anticipation. Shouldn't you be thinking about how to break Li Chuangong's two-sleeved green snake? The head of this generation of sword attendants frowned and asked softly. It really was a bit unreasonable. Not to mention that this was a critical moment before the start of a great battle. Even in normal times, a sword crown of the Wu family and a sword attendant shouldn't be talking about pickled cabbage. In any case, they should talk about some mysterious and profound understanding of the way of the sword, and say something that would make all the swordsmen in the world admire and respect. Thinking that only by living can I eat pickled cabbage, I have more fighting spirit. I also don't have to think about whether or not I feel guilty about using the Su of Gojoseon's sword. Whether it's Li Chuangong's two-sleeved green snake or Dong Tai's peach blossom branch, whether it's swordsmanship or sword intent, in the end, they all belong to the category of the way of the sword. In the world, there really isn't a place that understands the sword better than the Wu family. Wu Lu Ding laughed softly. His hands rested on the bamboo pole, and he squinted at the end of the reed path. The man from the Zhuang family, with a bundle of golden soft swords wrapped around his waist, and Wu Lu Ding happened to walk from the northeast to the center. This man, whose skin was as dark as a farmer's, had a wooden expression. He slightly lowered his head, and there was a bulge in his bosom, which seemed to be a wooden box. It was this thing that had brought him to Xianxia City. Chapter 200. Back then, there was no right or wrong in the 10 years of battle between Xianxia and Su Shao. Even if Wang Mingyang died on the fishing platform, he would not argue with Butcher Su Shao. It was not that he did not try to persuade Wang Mingyang to leave Xianxia. He even said to him that even if he won the battle, half of the southeast would collapse. What could he do?
But that person did not listen. In the end, he used the 200,000 lives of Xiangfan to protect one person's reputation. What was the difference between such a cruel and ruthless act and the enemy, Ren Tu? Was it more moral? When he heard of this tragic ending, he was in Beimang. He did not go to Beiliang to seek revenge. He only said that the Su family was not allowed to enter Xiangfan again. He meant what he said. Also, the king of Jing and Zhao Hang had given him the box with Wang Mingyang's eyeballs. He was only a martial artist. He did not want to get involved in the feud between the two vassal kings. But since the king of Beiliang's son dared to come to Xiangfan, he had to fulfill his promise. Because Wang Mingyang was his brother from the same father and mother. The two maidservants stood on tiptoe for a long time before they finally saw the infamous northern Liang crown prince. He did not stay comfortably in the carriage. Instead, he was riding a horse with an old Taoist with a sage-like demeanor. They were both puzzled. Was this crown prince not afraid of eating dust? No matter how good one's horsemanship was, it was hard to endure the bumpy ride. How could it be as comfortable as sitting in a carriage? They jogged back to the Wang Fei's carriage and said that the heir had arrived. Princess Fei slowly dismounted from her horse. She held the secret letter with only a few numbers in one hand and the rosary beads of satisfaction in the other. Her expression was normal. She was still that rich lady who stood out even in the noble city. She stood gracefully beside the carriage and looked at the young lecher who she didn't know whether to be hateful, funny, or pitiful as he approached. For some reason, her palms were sweating. Su Fengnian had already seen the carriages at the entrance of the reed marsh. When they were still some distance away, he asked softly with a serious expression, "Grandpa Wei, you even used the peachwood sword? Is it enough?" Old Taoist Mi Wei Shuyang, who had disappeared for 2 days, stroked his beard and smiled. "Mahogany 36, the sword formation is ready." Su Fengnian nodded and said gloomily, "In the letter, Lu Qiuer said that the younger brother of Prince Mingyang of Xiangfan is also here. I just don't understand. Back then, Xiangfan had been fighting for 10 years, and he never helped. Why is he here today? Have you found your conscience?" Wei Shuyang's expression immediately became serious. He sighed and shook his head. "I don't dare to speak nonsense. I only know that this person's martial cultivation is extremely profound. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter the martial arts rankings twice in a row, and be the 11th most powerful person in the world for 20 years in a row. Outsiders are just here to watch the show and feel that this title is laughable. I really can't laugh at all." Su Fengnian didn't hold the horse's reins. His hands were on the embroidered winter, spring, and thunder sabers. He narrowed his eyes at the two pretty maidservants who were being protected by the bodyguards of the Prince of Jing'an's Fu. If it was said that the 11th person surnamed Wang coming out of the city to entertain guests was outside of reason and within expectations, then Pei Wang Fei, who had already heard the news on the way out of the city, was somewhat baffled. Had that old turtle, Prince of Jin Zhao Hang, gone crazy? Did he want to put her, a Wang Fei, in this reed marsh that was practically a place of certain death? It was understandable that he wanted to lure her into a trap, but did he need to pay such a heavy price? In any case, she was a Wang Fei that was even more charming than Jade. Or had Zhao Heng gone crazy for the sake of hereditary succession? Su Fengnian murmured, "For now, we know that there are only the 11th and 4th red armors. What other tricks does Zhao Heng have? Since he was willing to treat Pei Nanwei as a chess piece, then he definitely wouldn't be so polite." What, after the event, he said that this Xueqi had ulterior motives towards Princess Jing and who was out of the city enjoying the scenery. He purposely followed her all the way and sullied Wang Fei? Then the king of Jing and would fly into a rage because of a beauty? Isn't this statement too careless? Furthermore, does Zhao Heng really have the confidence to kill me in one strike here? Or does this vassal king feel that he can't beat Su Xiao and that I have the confidence to win if I fight him? Su Fengnian whispered to Wei Shuyang, "Let Ningame and the Phoenix Battalion catch up quickly. There's no need to keep a distance of half a li. Also, make it clear to him that he's prepared to fight to the death." The old Taoist priest Wei Shuyang immediately urged his horse to turn back. Su Fengnian could already clearly see the beautiful faces of the two female servants from Jing'an Palace. He slowed down and kept pace with the carriage. He reached out and knocked on the wall of the carriage. Zhang and I lifted the curtain with a suspicious expression. Su Fengnian said, "Tell the old senior that the 11th in the world, Wang Mingyin, has come." The red armors of the talisman generals have also come. Perhaps there are still some powerful hidden experts. Zhang and I expressionlessly made an O sound. Be careful. Don't get off the carriage. Today is not a good day for you to see a joke. After saying this, Su Fengnian squeezed the horse's belly. Under the personal escort of Lu Qiantang, Yang Qingfeng, and Xu Xiu, the three retainers, they quickly moved forward. When Yu Yuwei left the city, she had already been arranged to ride in the same carriage as Jiang Enai and Li Chungang. When Su Fengnian saw Princess Pei, who seemed to be standing alone in front of the reed marsh, he didn't rush to dismount and exchange pleasantries. His hands pressed on his saber, he only sat high on the horse and looked down silently. Although the two female servants were shocked by this Bailiang His Royal Highness' handsomeness, they were eager to protect their master. Seeing him sitting proudly on the horse without saying a word, one of the female servants who had followed the Wang Fei and whose reputation was no less than that of the common stewards of the Wang Fu angrily rebuked. Bailiang Xueqi, seeing the Wang Fei, why don't you dismount? Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile and only stared at the great beauty who ranked higher than Xiangfan and Li Shuangjia. He had never seen the famous courtesan with the white jade lion rolling embroidered balls, but he was sure that if any man in the world had to choose between the Wang Fei Pei Nanwei and the beautiful Li Baishe, even if the latter was prettier, they would still choose to spend the night with Pei Nanwei. The legitimate Wang Fei of the 6 vassal kings of the Liang dynasty was not something that the concubines of the perished countries could compare to. Probably only the empress of the perished emperor could compare to her in terms of seduction. Su Fengnian hoped to see something from her eyes, but unfortunately, he couldn't find any clues. He couldn't even tell if she knew that she was in danger or not, and the person behind this ruthless trap was none other than Prince Jingon, who had been faithful to her for a day as husband and wife for 100 days. Su Fengnian became more and more curious. He didn't have the patience or mood to play games with the woman in front of him, so he directly asked, "You're not running?" Princess Jing'an looked up from under the horse and calmly asked, "Where can I run to?" Su Fengnian smiled mockingly and said, "It's good to hide." Princess Pei smiled faintly and said, "The King of Jing'an wants to give you a letter. Xueqi can rest assured that the letter isn't poisoned because I've already seen it." Su Fengnian only stretched out the embroidered winter knife. The Wang Fei wasn't angry at his arrogance and rudeness, and put the letter on the knife. Su Fengnian took out the letter and glanced at the contents. He smiled and said, "Uncle King of Jing'an wants to send me to the Yellow Springs." Pei Nanwei smiled and said, "Xueqi is so scheming. All these years, you've really been pretending to be dumb for dumb people to see. If you knew it would be like this, why did you do it in the first place?" Su Fengnian let go of the embroidered winter knife and stretched out his right hand. He smiled and said, "Are you comfortable?" Princess Pei, who had always been graceful and elegant, blushed. She bit her lips and said in a low voice, "Su Fengnian, you really deserve to die." Su Fengnian sat on the horse and didn't look at the furious Princess Jing'an. He only looked at the reeds and calmly said, "Wang Fei, don't worry. Before I die, I won't forget to take you with me. When I'm on the Yellow Springs, I'll teach your little mouth how to play the flute. The things that Zhao Sun wants to do but doesn't dare to do, I can do it." P.S. Announcing 2 fan groups enchanting red-robed executive group number 854366605 entry requirements. Have a Zongheng account and have 1,000 points. Beacon Rising Again stabilizing the country group number 318255159 entry requirements. Have a Zongheng account and have 5,000 points. Or Zongheng members can join. Chapter 201. Hearing that Su Fengnian had humiliated Princess Jing'an, who was second only to him in Qing province, the 2 maids and the palace guards were enraged. Although Pei Nanwei and the King of Jing'an had a strange way of interacting, in the eyes of outsiders, they were indeed respectful to each other. They were a rarely seen loving couple in the Marquis monarch lineage. The palace servants had heard many stories about the Bailiang heir, but most of them were absurd and hedonistic actions that could not be brought to the table. They were more amused than fearful. Moreover, the King of Jing'an was not a local snake in Qing province, but a legitimate local dragon in yellow robes. Immediately, the guards drew their swords in a show of force. A shrewish maid, eager to protect her master and claim credit, angrily rebuked Su Fengnian, directly calling him by his name. To their surprise, Su Fengnian only lowered his head to look at the few numbers on the secret letter. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the rosary beads in Princess Pei's hand. Although the master did not make a move, It did not mean that the Bailiang lackeys behind her were deaf and blind. Dongyue Lu Qiantang had a sinister smile on his face.
He urged his horse forward and chopped down with his giant sword. Before the bluffing guards could react, the sword had already cut off the head of the maid who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth.
The head fell to the ground and rolled several times, mixing with the dust and blood. In particular, the maid's pretty face still retained a vivid expression of shock.
In the eyes of others, it was a ghastly sight.
Not only were the Jing and palace guards stunned, even Pei Nanwei was startled. The priceless rosary beads in her hand burned her hand and fell to the ground. She no longer dared to pick them up. After killing in front of Princess Jing'en, Lu Qiantang took advantage of the situation to charge forward. Yang Qingfeng and Xu Xiu were not willing to fall behind. In a flash, everyone except Pei Nanwei was chopped up like vegetables. One of the guards was even split in two by Lu Qiantang's sword. Pei Nanwei turned her head.
Her throat moved as she squatted on the ground and retched.
Su Fengnian saw that the Jing and palace guards were so weak that they could not withstand a single blow.
He frowned and asked, "Why are these guards so useless?
Is the king of Jing and Zhao Heng afraid that you won't die?" Pei Nanwei only cared about vomiting. She really couldn't imagine that the high and mighty Wang Fei would also be in such an indecent state. She really didn't know if Shizi Zhao Sun would still be unable to extricate himself if he saw this scene. Su Fengnian pressed his blade and dismounted from his horse. He walked to Pei Nanwei's side and crouched down to gently pat Princess Jing'en's back. In a quiet voice, he asked, "Do you know what Zhao Heng's follow-up plans are?" The trembling Pei Nanwei had her back to Su Fengnian.
She used her sleeve to wipe her mouth and smiled coldly. "Even if I knew, why would I tell you?
How the king of Jing and Zhao Heng treats me is a family matter. Su Fengnian, who do you think you are? Don't think that you can make me listen to you with just a few words. No matter how cold-blooded Zhao Heng is, he's still better than a bastard like you." Su Fengnian gently stroked Princess Pei's beautiful back. It looked like he was taking advantage of her, but his face was expressionless. His heart was as calm as still water. His tone was gentle, and he said with a smile, "Don't you want to live and go back to be Princess Jing'en? Pei Nanwei, you have to know that if I really die, I will definitely drag you down with me. Otherwise, won't I be letting that father and son pair benefit from a crooked beam? I don't mind telling you, if this time Zhao Heng's plan really succeeds, then Shizi Zhao Sun will inherit his position. Even if you can survive under my blade, won't you be on tenterhooks when you go back? Princess Pei, are you really willing to be played by a man like Zhao Sun?" Princess Pei slowly stood up and staggered a bit. Su Fengnian wanted to support her, but she fiercely flung his hand away in disgust. Su Fengnian didn't get angry and only bent down to pick up the crown prince's bracelet. With his scoundrel personality, he was even able to pick up the red mud inkstone that Jiang and I had thrown into the lake. Thus, it was reasonable for him to be satisfied with this bracelet. Su Fengnian raised his head to look at the lush green reeds and began to calculate in his mind. The king of Jing and Zhao Heng was currently on the side of the old fox known as the 11th Wang Mingyin. Regardless of whether or not the 4 red-armored talisman generals belonged to Zhao Heng's strength, they were definitely enemies and not friends. The only difference was whether or not they would attack together with Wang Mingyin. If nothing unexpected happened, Zhao Heng would immediately use the vassal king's tiger talisman and mobilize more than 800 armored cavalry from the eastern outskirts of Xiangfan straight to the reeds. Fortunately, before the battle between the two tigers ended, these troops wouldn't interfere. After all, there were more than 800 people. Zhao Heng didn't dare to guarantee that the king of Jing and didn't have any spies. Right now, they were already in the perfect situation of the mantis stalking the cicada. If someone were to secretly ambush them, then the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. He believed that with Zhao Heng's temperament, he was confident that he could kill him in the reeds. Su Fengnian's expression was somewhat grave. Not to mention the 4 retainers, including Wei Shuyang, behind him were the 100 Bailiang cavalry led by Ning Amei, as well as the old god of swords Li Chungang. The chess pieces of both sides were wrestling with each other. According to common sense, Li Chungang, who was ranked 8th in the world, would fight against Wang Mingyin, who was ranked 11th. Wei Shuyang's group and Ning Amei's 100 light cavalry would fight against 4 red-armored talisman generals. No matter how one looked at it, Su Fengnian would win. Of course, Zhao Heng definitely had a backup plan, but he still had Bluebird and a group of Bailiang loyalists hiding in the shadows. Where did Zhao Heng's confidence come from to send him to the Yellow Springs? At some point, Princess Pei had taken off her shoes and held them in her hands. Her white socks stepped on the ground as she stared blankly at the muddy path covered in green reeds. Every autumn, she would disperse the imperial bodyguards and walk on the muddy path in an unfitting manner. The path would be densely packed with small brown spikes, which were the tips of the reeds that had been poured into the ground. When she took off her shoes and walked on the path, the soles of her feet would hurt. Her skin was whiter than snow, and every time she walked back and forth, the soles of her feet would be dripping with blood. However, Pei Nanwei liked this kind of self-mutilating behavior. She preferred to lie alone in the small boat, letting the autumn wind and snow cover her body. Should he just stab this woman to death and be done with it? Chapter 202. Su Fengnian's eyes were filled with murderous intent. He didn't care who she was. So what if she was Princess Jing'an? Even if a concubine from the palace was in his way, Su Fengnian would kill her without hesitation when it was time to kill. In this world, there was a distinction between the noble and the lowly, but whose life was more valuable than his own? Just as Su Fengnian was thinking about how to give Pei Nanwei a quick death and make Zhao Heng unhappy, a man and a woman walked over from the small path. They were both very young and appeared particularly high-spirited at this moment. The young man carried a bamboo pole on his shoulder. 10 steps behind him was a delicate and pretty woman with a sword on her back. Her eyes were closed and she appeared cold and cheerless. The first to appear was not the 11th? The swordless young man didn't look at Su Fengnian. He smiled and looked at the carriage. In a clear voice he said, "Old Sword God Li, the junior of the Wu family, Wu Lu Ding, has come today with the Su of Gojoseon sword. I only ask for a battle." As soon as he finished speaking, the reeds on both sides of the sword crown danced wildly even though there was no wind. It made this future swordsman look like an immortal. Formless sword chi instantly filled the air. Pei Nanwei's body was unsteady. Su Fengnian pulled out Xiaodong with one hand to support her. He raised his other hand and placed an extraordinarily handsome green and white spear falcon on his arm. He turned around and said to Wei Shuyang and the others, "Follow the spear falcon into the reeds and delay the Fu General Hong Jia." Su Fengnian raised his arm and the spear falcon once again charged into the clouds. Seeing Su Fengnian's gaze, Judumi Taoist Wei Shuyang nodded quietly and took the lead into the reeds. Other than the two major sects of inner and outer alchemy, there were many other sects with their own supernatural powers. Among them, there were the Fu Yao sect's necromancers who could exorcise ghosts and summon gods. There were also warlocks who were proficient in Chiman Duanjia. This formation was not set up by the military, but by human power and the right time. It could be said that it could turn something rotten into something magical. It was rumored that the top warlocks could make soldiers out of beans. Most of the Taoist priests in the Imperial Palace's Imperial Observatory were proficient in observing images, observing qi, and exploring the veins of the earth. They were known as fortune-tellers who studied the geography. Wei Shuyang's martial cultivation was not outstanding. Otherwise, he would not have been struck down by the white-haired old man outside the Tide Listening Pavilion. However, Wei Shuyang was a warlock who was proficient in setting up formations. No matter how ferocious the red armor was, it was still a Taoist divine weapon. Wei Shuyang's 36 Heavenly Dipper Peach Wood Sword formation had a miraculous effect. Moreover, Su Fengnian had spent the past few days studying the cloud patterns on the water armor. He had gained quite a bit of insight. Naturally, those peachwood swords that contained the power of Taoism to slay demons could be targeted. Furthermore, the Taoist ancestors had clearly stated that reed ropes made of reeds could be used to ward off evil spirits. Since ancient times, the Way of Judumi had a spell to hang reed ropes to ward off evil spirits. Moreover, Xu Xiu was originally from the southern borders witch sect. After the battle on the small path in the rain that day, His Royal Highness had asked Yang Qingfeng to make early preparations. "Zhao Heng, since you were able to invite the Sword Crown Prince Wu Luding to take the lead, this Shitzi will use Grandfather Wei and the others, who have an innate advantage, to break the red armor that lacks water of the 5 elements." Su Fengnian patted Princess Pei's slender waist with his embroidered dagger and said softly, "Wang Fei, if you don't want to die, then retreat with me." Pei Nanwei did not make a sound. She could not bear to look at the broken limbs on the ground. She followed Su Fengnian away from the man and woman who had brazenly challenged them. She naturally knew that this vicious and merciless wanderer had a world-shaking old sword god protecting him. Since these people dared to compete with swords, they had the right to appear in the reed marsh today.
Presumably they were not some nobody. When she saw Su Fengnian retreat, he was still facing the man and woman, unwilling to turn over his back. She laughed coldly in her heart. Was this guy really Su Zhao's son? So cowardly and afraid of trouble. At this time, Su Fengnian slowly retreated and coincidentally met Princess Pei. Seeing her mocking and disgusted expression, he guessed her undisguised thoughts. He smiled and said, "What, do you think I'm afraid of death? Wang Fei, if you really are not afraid of death, why would you be willing to follow me? You could have stayed where you were and let the sword energy cut you to pieces. This death is really ugly. It doesn't match the noble status of Wang Fei." A lazy voice came from the carriage. "Little Su, this old man needs to borrow a sword again today." Su Fengnian unhappily shouted, "Borrow it, borrow it. This Xianxia can't wait to borrow 100 or 1,000 swords from you." Pei Nanwei's face was stunned. This bastard was still the Xianxia of Beiliang. He really did not have any heroic spirit. Did he not even know how to act calm and pretend to be a great general? Su Fengnian did not pay attention to Princess Pei. He looked at the woman with the sword behind Wu Lu Ding. The Su of Gojosian sword? Good, that was the second most famous sword in the world. According to Aunt Zhao Yute, the Su of Gojosian was the name of this generation's Jianzhong family head and the name of his sword. How did it end up in that woman's hands? Wu Lu Ding defeated the Wu family sword master? That shouldn't be. One had to know that his master Li Yishan, who lived in seclusion on the top floor of the Tide Listening Pavilion, was one of the judges of the previous generation's civil, military, and general evaluations. He had also mentioned some secrets. There was an unwritten rule in the civil, military, and general evaluations. The experts from the two Zen temples of Mount Longhu and the Wu family sword tomb would not be considered for the rankings. Half of it was out of respect, and the other half was out of concern. These old immortals and old monsters had unpredictable temperaments. For example, Qi Xuanzhen, who was the world's #1 expert in Taoism and swordsmanship, who had defeated all demons in the world with a single sword strike, would not be considered for the rankings. Who would dare go against him? But since Wu Lu Ding had left the Wu family sword tomb with the identity of a sword crown, if he had only come out after defeating the Su of Gojosian, he should be able to enter the top 10 experts. Could it be that the one who had defeated the Su of Gojosian was not Wu Lu Ding, but that female sword attendant? Su Fengnian looked at the woman. Unexpectedly, as if she had sensed something, she immediately opened her eyes and looked over. Su Fengnian's heart skipped a beat, but he still smiled. However, the woman closed her eyes again, as if she had seen through Su Fengnian's capabilities and was disdainful of him. Su Fengnian did not take it to heart. He threw a look at Bluebird, who was holding a good sword, indicating that she should lend the sword to the old god of swords. Although the sword in Bluebird's hand could also cut through hair, it was still slightly inferior to the crimson afterglow in Lu Qiantong's hand, not to mention the great Liang dragonfinch in the red sandalwood sword case. Initially, Su Fengnian was still somewhat worried, but when Bluebird tossed the sword into the air, Old Man Li's figure rushed out of the carriage, laughing loudly as he held the sword hilt and flew towards Wu Lu Ding. Su Fengnian immediately calmed down. The old god of swords was ranked 8th in the world. Was the 8th ranking really that low? There were millions of swordsmen in the world who wielded swords. Were there not only this old man wearing a sheepskin fur coat and that Dong Tai standing above millions of people? Who would dare to say that Li Chungang would stop at the 8th place after truly returning to the peak? Only then did the old god of swords soar into the air like a dragon. A farmer shuttled out from the reeds and said inconspicuously, "Crown Prince, may I borrow your head?" Chapter 203. 11th had finally arrived. Regardless of whether it was a meticulous plan or an unintentional one, this most tragic character of the top 10 had stepped on the most appropriate place at the most appropriate time. Almost instantly, he had grasped Su Fengnian's Achilles' heel. Li Chungang was going to fight with Wu Lu Ding, who carried the Su of Gojosian's sword. Both of them represented the new and old sword masters of Zhonghu. Naturally, they would not be able to escape with just a few moves. Wei Shuyang, Lu Qiantang, and the other three had all gone to the reed marsh. This was a bloody battle where the outcome was hard to predict. It was possible that all of them would die. At this moment, Su Fengnian was only left with the death warrior Bluebird, Ning Mei, and the 100 light cavalry behind him. Su Fengnian turned his head to look at the eager halberd Ning Mei. Without needing to ask, the Beiliang general with the word bow in his hand nodded. He raised one hand and the 30 light cavalry spread out in a fan shape. 30 crossbows were pointed directly at the master who had long been famous in Jianghu. Without a doubt, this was another grudge match between an iron-blooded soldier and a martial artist. With the halberd Ning Amei blocking the crossbows, Su Fengnian temporarily did not look at 11th. He only stared at the old sword god. It was not that he had underestimated Wang Mingyin, but in a battle of life and death between masters, it was destined that the moves would be extremely ingenious. Whether it was Li Chungang or Wu Luding, they were both masters of the sword. Perhaps any one of their moves would be even more ingenious than the moves he had learned from the secret manuals. Looking at them and remembering their outlines would be a good thing. Su Fengnian could not help but murmur in a low voice, "They're really at daggers drawn." Li Chungang raised his sword and went forward. Wu Luding faced the senior swordsman who had been famous for 60 years. Not only was he not afraid, he laughed heartily and with a twist of his hand, the bamboo pole spun off his shoulder and flew forward. Dressed in a green robe, he rushed forward and grabbed one end of the bamboo pole. Just like on the river, he used the bamboo as a sword and stabbed the other end of the bamboo pole into the road. He lightly shouted, "Rise!" Last time, he had overturned the river and overturned the boat with a single pole. This time, he forcefully pried up a large piece of thick and heavy soil from the muddy road and threw it at Li Chungang. After the curved bamboo raised the dust that covered the sky and the sun, the bamboo pole returned to his shoulder. With a loud bang, he stomped on the ground, creating a large pit. Instantly, countless clouds of dust flew up from under his feet. The bamboo pole that should have been brittle on the spot was bent into a soul-stirring arc by his hands. His hands formed a hand seal, and the large pole was like a full moon bow, bouncing into the air. It bounced into the cloud of dust and injected a swift and fierce sword chi into it. Li Chungang, who was flying through the air, sneered. As usual, he chopped down with his sword, chopping up the obstructing cloud of dust. At the same time, in a spurt of energy, he smashed the sword chi contained within the cloud of dust into pieces. The cloud of dust filled the air and shot in all directions. When the soil mixed with the abundant sword chi landed on the ground, it pierced countless potholes. The two of them were 200 steps away from each other on the open official road. The sword chi dazzled and swirled in the air, creating dozens of crisscrossing gullies. Princess Jing'an was dumbfounded. If she had stayed on the spot, wouldn't she have been chopped into pieces like Su Fengnian said? Would she have died without a complete corpse? The power of a light sword could split the air and split the earth. Was it really so terrifying and invincible? Princess Pei originally had no impression of martial arts in Jianghu. Today, after seeing it with her own eyes, she realized how terrifying it was. She tilted her head and secretly looked at Su Fengnian. She couldn't see any clues from his eyes. She couldn't tell if he was confident or if he had lost his soul. Li Chuangong's sword was like a rainbow piercing the sun. The white light was dazzling as it shot through the cloud of dust towards Wu Luding. This sword was blocked by the sword chi of the bamboo pole and the cloud of dust, but it didn't seem to be weakened in the slightest. With the bamboo pole back in his hand, Wu Luding pushed off with the tip of his foot and hurriedly retreated. He was just a hair's breadth away from the old god of swords' swift and fierce sword. Wrapped in an unparalleled sword will, the old god of swords' sword pierced through the spot where the sword crown of the Wu clan had landed, creating a huge pit that was about 10 feet deep. The green-robed Wu Luding laughed softly and said, "What a good one-sword immortal kneels." As he spoke leisurely, the bamboo pole didn't slow down at all. It swept towards the old god of swords' head, whistling like the wind. The old god of swords had a cold smile on his face. How could this young man dare to talk about the way of the sword with a bamboo pole in front of this old man? The sword chi in his hand surged. Even the common people could see the green light curling around the tip of the sword. The so-called sword chi, a high realm, allowed the sword to give birth to a grand spirit that connected with the heavens and earth. The common people only knew that a true man should use a 3-foot sword to kill and break through the enemy. Did they really think that it was just a 3-foot sword made of copper and iron? After the one-armed Li Chungang landed on the road, he still casually swung his sword. This time, Wu Luding didn't avoid the sharp edge. The bamboo pole didn't change its trajectory and continued to sweep through the army. The two sword moves were nothing more than one horizontal and one vertical. The green sword in Li Chuangong's hand clashed head-on with Wu Liuding's bamboo pole, producing a clanging sound that defied common sense and pierced the eardrums. The pitiful Princess Pei covered her ears and screamed, but it was futile.
She almost vomited blood. Su Fengnian frowned slightly. He walked in front of her and imperceptibly blocked the ripples of qi from the collision. After the sword in Li Chuangong's hand came into contact with the bamboo pole, it wasn't deflected. Instead, it was just like how he taught Su Fengnian's sword moves and sword aura. In an instant, it flicked the bamboo pole 16 times, each time frightening. The tip of the sword, which was originally an inch long, exploded to 3 inches long. The onlookers could only see the green sword aura dancing wildly in the old god of swords' hand. Then, they saw Wu Liuding's bamboo pole bending again and again. Finally, it couldn't withstand the old god of swords' endless sword aura and made a loud bang. The bamboo pole was, after all, just an ordinary bamboo pole. When it broke, Li Chungang, who had gained the initiative, didn't show any change in his expression. He took the opportunity to hack at Wu Liuding's chest. The bamboo pole broke into 2. The latter held half in each hand and retreated again and again. After floating 20 steps, Li Chungang took another 20 steps forward. The tip of his sword never left Wu Liuding's chest. The tip of his sword was 5 feet away. The sword aura was like a green snake, but it was only a foot away. Wu Liuding finally stopped being careless. He changed the bamboo pole from one hand to a 2-handed sword. The Wu family's sword tomb was famous for its unparalleled sword moves. Since he was able to walk out of the tomb as a sword crown, there was no doubt that he had reached the peak of swordsmanship. The bamboo pole didn't emit any sword aura. It was only good for unpredictable moves. Even when facing a swordmaster like Li Chungang, who had 1 foot in the door of the sword Immortal, his sword moves were still domineering and unstoppable. Li Chuangong's frown loosened and he smiled. For some reason, he withdrew the green light on his sword and no longer used the sword aura. He just used sword moves against sword moves. The two fought close to each other, dazzling the eyes. In the blink of an eye, they had swung 100 or 1,000 swords. The 11th in the world was also an eye-opener. There were a total of 8 kinds of crossbows in the Liang dynasty. Apart from the 4 that were shot by foot, the cardinal crossbow in the hands of the Bailiang cavalry was the most lethal. It was comparable to the yellow stirrup-treading crossbow. Therefore, this Bailiang crossbow was called Mountain Splitter, which was as famous as the Bailiang saber. Since it dared to be called Mountain Splitter, its power was amazing. 30 crossbows were shot at the same time. However, the 11th Wang Mingyin just walked forward without fear. He stretched out a hand and pointed at the air in front of him, hitting the first wave of arrows to the ground. After the first wave of arrows was splashed, the second wave of arrows came in rapid succession. The old-fashioned Wang Mingyin no longer pointed at the world with one hand. Instead, he clenched his fists and his clothes puffed up. He actually assumed a rude posture of resisting the crossbows. Several waves of arrows were violently bounced off by the qi around his body and stabbed into the ground at an angle. For a moment, Wang Mingyin's back was covered with arrows. Only when the crossbow was angry could it be called a crossbow. However, this farmer was able to block the arrows that were like splashing ink on his head without batting an eyelid. He said that he wanted to borrow His Royal Highness's head. He would do what he said. Chapter 204. The captain of the Phoenix Battalion, Yuan Meng, narrowed his eyes as he stared at the unknown Jianghu man. He pulled on the reins of his horse and charged forward with his saber. The Bailiang light cavalry cooperated with each other skillfully. The 20 men on either side of Yuan Meng raised their crossbows and prepared to attack. The remaining 10 men behind them charged forward with their sabers drawn. The Bailiang army placed great importance on horse management. Not to mention how majestic the heavy armored cavalry was, the light cavalry was equipped with horses that were far superior to the cavalry outside of Bailiang. Furthermore, the Phoenix Battalion was the personal guard of the Bailiang army. The horses they rode were all heavy breeds. They were 7 feet tall and weighed more than 2,000 jin. When they charged forward, regardless of whether they were carrying sabers or spears, the cavalry charged forward like a mountain torrent. Their horses were extremely powerful. Pei Nanwei did not know much about the Spring and Autumn War. She had only heard rumors that the Bailiang cavalry was invincible. Today, when she saw the charging power of the 10 cavalry, she could not help but feel dazzled. If 10 men and 10 horses were already like this, then the 300,000-strong cavalry under the command of the king of Bailiang must have trampled over the 6 nations. But what happened next made Princess Pei's eyes widen. The strong man who looked like a farmer charged toward the 10 cavalry.
His hands parried the rain of arrows that came from the two sides of the fan. He ran with large strides and collided with the tall horse of the captain, Yuan Meng, who bore the brunt of the charge. As Princess Jing'an expected, the cruel scene of the farmer's blood splattering 3 feet high did not occur. Instead, the dull man used the mountain crash to break the neck of the warhorse and sent Yuan Meng and his horse flying. Yuan Meng did not even have time to chop down with his saber. The man quickened his pace. His feet rumbled on the ground, not losing to the sound of the horse's hooves. He spread out his hands and placed them on the bodies of the 2 horses. With a sudden burst of strength, he threw the 2 horses behind Yuan Meng into the air. Pei Nanwei, who was born in a literary and aristocratic family and then raised in a golden and jade cage by King of Jing'an, opened her mouth slightly in disbelief. How could there be such a godlike martial artist in the world? The farmer threw off the 3 warhorses in one go, and the 2 Bailiang sabers at his sides finally took the opportunity to chop down. The man with the strength to pull mountains and rivers had a gloomy face. Both of his hands gripped the world's sharpest standard cold saber. With a twist, he curled it up. "Come down." Hearing him calmly say 2 words, 2 valiant light cavalrymen were pulled off their horses and thrown out. The man's horse came to an abrupt halt, raised its hooves high, and stomped down heavily. His hands, which were as big as praying mats, retracted at lightning speed. He raised them above his head and grabbed the horse's hooves that weighed 1,000 catties. With a cold snort, he tore the horse apart. How much strength would it take to tear a charging warhorse into 2? Without a mount, the light cavalryman of the Phoenix Battalion fell down and was coincidentally punched in the chest by the farmer. His armor and chest exploded at the same time. He died on the spot, his flesh and blood badly mangled. Following that, the other cavalrymen were easily thrown out by the valiant man. None of them were lucky enough to escape. Pei Nanwei couldn't bear to watch any longer. She subconsciously glanced at the Bailiang heir standing in front of her. His back was still upright. She moved a little and could finally see some of his side profile. However, she didn't see the expected panic. This made Pei Nanwei very disappointed. That man was unstoppable and had even said that he wanted to borrow her head. Was this Su Fengnian really not afraid at all? Pei Nanwei looked at the battlefield again. In just one face-to-face encounter, His Royal Highness' personal cavalry had lost several men. However, what made Princess Pei even more shocked was that even in such a cruel situation, the other light cavalrymen of the Phoenix Battalion were still as upright as His Royal Highness. They turned a blind eye to the bloody scene, especially the burly general with the halberd. He was covered in heavy black armor. Including the armor and the halberd, he weighed more than 400 catties. In the face of defeat, he only sat on his horse and didn't move. What a terrifying heart of stone! Princess Pei felt sorrow in her heart. Were all Bailiang's soldiers so heartless? Great halberd Ningame raised his arm and held his halberd. The tip of the halberd was pointed at the 11th man, Wang Mingyin. Among the 20 cavalrymen, 10 of them continued to silently raise their crossbows while the other 10 continued to charge. The light cavalrymen of the first 10 cavalrymen who hadn't died in battle remounted their horses and got into formation. The heavily injured ones sat on the ground and picked up their crossbows. They were faintly forming a pincer attack. When Bailiang faced an enemy, they could only fight to the death. Princess Jing'an looked at the 10 cavalrymen who didn't care about their lives as they urged their horses forward. In the past, when she heard the king of Jing'an, Zhao Hang, talk about it, she didn't understand the bone-chilling coldness in his words. She finally understood the meaning of these words. She asked in a trembling voice, "Can your light cavalrymen block them?" Su Fengnian didn't make a sound. He focused his attention on the battle between Li Chungang and Wu Lu Ding. Beads of sweat had already formed on his forehead. The only thing he could do now was to memorize all the swordsmanship that he could see through. This was 1,000 times more exhausting than memorizing the rules of Go. The old god of swords didn't use the sword gang. Against Wu Lu Ding, he only used swordsmanship to fight swordsmanship. Both sides' swordsmanship had reached the point of perfection and was extremely ingenious. The old man had the intention of letting him watch the battle and benefit from it. He couldn't let this good intention go to waste. The Wu family's sword catacomb took a narrow and winding path. They abandoned the faintly discernible swordsmanship and sought only one sword move that no one could understand. It was rumored that the swordsmen in the sword catacomb were all withered like ghosts. There was no lack of brilliant swordsmanship masters who had been imprisoned by the Wu family. They could only feed and nurture the swords of the younger generation of the Wu family for the rest of their lives. Over time, not only did the sword catacomb contain hundreds of thousands of swords, but it also recorded 80 to 90% of the world's sword moves in detail. On the road, although Wu Liuding's bamboo sword was getting shorter and shorter, his moves were becoming more and more overbearing and fierce. As the saying goes, an inch shorter is an inch more dangerous. Even though Wu Liuding was at a disadvantage, he was still able to use his bamboo sword to fight the old god of swords, who had the sword gang, for 100 moves without losing. This was something to be proud of. Su Fengnian slowly exhaled a turbid breath and muttered to himself. Behind him, Princess Pei was confused and said, "Skill reward." When Princess Pei saw the second group of light cavalry being destroyed by the man who had trampled all the way here, she couldn't help but ask worriedly, "If even this general can't stop him, what will you do?" Unfortunately, Su Fengnian still ignored her. In a fit of anger, Princess Jing'an raised her hand to hit the Bailiang on the back of His Royal Highness. This was originally a subconscious action, but before she could make a move, the embroidered winter scabbard struck her abdomen. Her face immediately turned pale and she crouched on the ground. Her body curled up in pain, and her eyes were filled with tears. She almost thought she was going to die. Su Fengnian, who didn't show any mercy to the fairer sex, narrowed his eyes and looked at the reeds. He still ignored the great halberd Ningame. Bluebird said softly, "If Ningame is defeated, I ask for a weapon." Su Fengnian asked curiously, "What is it?" Bluebird's expression was complicated. She lowered her head and said, "The spear of Xona." Su Fengnian was stunned. He turned his head and said, "Where did I get this famous weapon that the spear Immortal King embroidered?" Bluebird looked at the carriage and said calmly, "It has always been hidden in the axle." Su Fengnian said in surprise, "Bluebird, tell me the truth. What is your relationship with Wang Xiu?" Bluebird said softly, "He is my father. He killed my mother." Su Fengnian sighed in his heart. He hesitated and said, "If Ningame is defeated, then so be it. I didn't think that he and the 100 light cavalry could exhaust Wang Mingyin to death. When the time comes, when the 11th person in the world is exhausted, then you can make your move." Princess Pei, who was squatting on the ground with her hands on her stomach, raised her head and gritted her teeth. "Su Fengnian, aren't you afraid that the 100 people will die?" Su Fengnian turned his head and looked at Princess Jing'an, who could no longer maintain her composure. He said calmly, "What do you know?" Pei Nanwei, who could only talk to Su Fengnian by raising her head, laughed nervously and said, "What do I know? What is the difference between you, the crown prince of the king of Bailiang, and the crown prince of the king of Jing'an, Zhao Sun? Didn't you both cower in the face of battle and only know how to send people, whose lives are lower than ants in your eyes, to die in vain? Today, I want to see how you will kneel and beg for mercy from that boar of Jianghu. Then you can just wait." Su Fengnian turned his head to look at the battle between the green-robed Wu Liuding and the old god of swords in the sheep fur coat. If nothing unexpected happened, Li Chuangong's good temper was about to be used up. What followed was a truly hearty battle. Bluebird stared at Pei Nanwei. One was a lowly servant, while the other was an extremely wealthy Wang Fei. Immediately, Bluebird looked down at Pei Nanwei. The latter's hair stood on end and she was as silent as a cicada in winter. Princess Pei watched as the servant girl, whose eyes were murderous, walked towards the carriage. She bent down and pulled out an axle. It shattered in her hand, revealing a blood-red spear. The name of the spear was Instant? Chapter 205. The two ends of the reed marsh were two completely different worlds. Over there, a great battle was raging, and various powers were locked in a fierce battle. This side, on the other hand, was calm and tranquil. The old man was sipping some home-brewed rice wine that he had bought from a farmer. Not far away, a group of young children were whispering to each other. From time to time, they would cast curious glances at the old man. To the children who grew up in the reed marsh, the old man looked very much like the old Confucian scholars who usually came out to enjoy the scenery in Xiangfan. However, the old scholars who came here with their families to play didn't think much of the wine. They all brought their own delicacies and wine. The old man smiled kindly and waved at a young girl from the cottage owner's family. The little girl walked forward timidly. The old man weighed his old gray money pouch and seemed to be embarrassed. He only poured out a dozen coins and handed them all to the girl, telling her to ask her parents to cook a fresh fish that was caught by the old water crow. Watching the little girl skipping away, the old man smiled and murmured with his yellow hair hanging down his back.
He was very happy with himself. Since ancient times, Qingzhou was called Yunmeng Marsh. The villagers in Reed Marsh all raised water crows and ate yellow croaker every day. The old man liked the simple taste of steamed yellow croaker very much. The group of Xianxia scholars went to the faraway place and coveted seafood, sparing hundreds of gold coins to buy it. Even if they stored it with ice cubes along the way, it had already lost its taste. In the old man's eyes, they were the lowest class of diners, not to mention gluttons. Out of the corner of his eye, he glimpsed the little girl in a daze beside the black water tank outside the house. In the end, he picked the biggest yellow croaker in the tank and gave it to her mother to steam. The old man smiled and said, "Only a child has the heart of Bodhi. Humans are always thieves." Then he looked at the bamboo table. On the table, there were dozens of pebbles picked up from the shore. The pebbles were of different sizes and different distances. When the farmer was cooking fish, the old man had already thrown away some smaller pebbles from the table, while several larger pebbles moved closer to the area where the pebbles were densest. The girl came with a wooden plate with a steamed yellow croaker. The amount of chopped green onions and old ginger was enough. She also added some wine and some ham. The old man took the chopsticks and didn't care if the farmer followed the steaming method to cook the fish. A small yellow croaker was enough to satisfy people. This was the real taste. The old man put the plate on the corner of the table where there were not many pebbles and ate quickly. The little girl saw the old man eating with relish and was very happy. She was no longer afraid of strangers and asked softly, "Grandpa, are you from Xianxia City?" The old man slowly put down his chopsticks, shook his head and smiled without a word. The little girl who was tanned because she had to work with her parents said, "Oh." She felt a little regretful. Her peers in the village always talked about how magnificent the city was and how rich the people in the city were. She had never been to Xianxia and naturally envied it. She also heard that the sisters there were like fairies. She thought it would be great if she could be half as beautiful as them when she grew up. After the old man finished eating the steamed yellow croaker, he handed the wooden plate and chopsticks back to the little girl and said softly, "When I leave, tell your parents to leave the reed marsh today and go to the Carp Guanyin temple 10 miles away to burn incense. After burning incense, you can ask for some silver from the Guanyin temple. You only need to break the stone carp in her hand and there will be silver inside. Little girl, remember not to go home in a hurry after getting the silver. The earliest you can do is wait until the sky is dark. Don't forget to talk about this after I leave. Leave early and come back late." The little girl was stunned and thought she was listening to a heavenly book.
The old man did not think much of it and smiled. "Just think of me as the earth god of this land,"
she said excitedly. "Grandpa, are you really a deity?" The old man did not comment and touched the little girl's head. He put his finger to his mouth and shushed her, indicating that she should not say anything. The little girl nodded vigorously. The old man lowered his head and looked at the scattered pebbles on the table again. He seemed to be thinking about a long game of chess. The little girl left quietly. Since the old man was not from Xianxia, how could he be the earth god who protected the land? Moreover, the old man was not a deity. He was just a child with a sincere heart. How could he think of these things? However, although he was not a deity, in the eyes of the people, he was no different from a deity. During the spring and autumn period, the 9 kingdoms were in chaos and there were many abnormal phenomena everywhere. The azure dragon came out of the water, the divine monument broke through the earth, and the female chicken turned into a male. Which one of these did not come from him? Not to mention these imperial courts that ruled the world, just take the 3-foot game of Go as an example. Back then, the scholars of the West Chu dynasty were talkative and the game was popular. The 9 stages of Go were created by him. Now, in the world of Go there were 3 famous schools of Go. The imperial court had set up a game of Go, waiting for the imperial decree. Wang Jisun and Song Shutong, who were the top chess players of the 6 great countries, were responsible for evaluating the game of Go. There were more than 400 people who qualified for the game of Go. This old man claimed that these 400 players had gathered together to play against him and that he could easily win. He was the only one in the world who could say such arrogant words. Unfortunately, Wang Jisun and the others did not dare to accept the challenge. No matter if they were working together or alone, they all pretended to be deaf and dumb. This old man's Go skills were extraordinary.
But later on, for some unknown reason, this old fanatic said that he would never talk to anyone again. The old man stared at the table and laughed. 500 years ago, he was invincible.
How could it be a lie?
Wei Xiong of the Su family wants to stand shoulder to shoulder with this old man, but it's still too early. When the old man first entered the Xianxia Academy, he claimed to be one of the top 3. His sword was like a dragon and snake, and he wrote the record of the Pillar of Strength in one go in the mud after the heavy rain by the lakeside. At the beginning, he said that he wanted to establish his heart for heaven and earth, establish his life for the people, inherit the lost knowledge for the past saints, and establish peace for all ages. These years, he had traveled all over the world and had nothing to do, so he taught Lu Su how to place his pieces and take root, and how to be grounded. He taught Li by the lion's voice and body double, taught the fake princess how to charm people and bring disaster to the country, wrote the precepts for women on behalf of a woman, made Guangling Wang Chao kill his second son, and misled the group of ignorant juniors from the imperial astronomer. As long as he was willing, who would not be a chess piece in his hands? Next, he was going to teach a little fellow named Xiao Mu Jian how to use a sword. After the fall of West Chu's grand preceptor, in addition to holding a grudge against the butcher Su Xiao, he also beat his chest and stomped his feet, cursing old Huang for killing 3 million people with his 3-inch tongue. However, these ups and downs of the country had all become the patterns on the chessboard, and were left to the later generations. The old man, whose specific age could not be determined, picked up a round cobblestone in the middle of the table. This one, surnamed Zhao, placed his piece in Tianyuan. He doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, but his actions are cute. The old man sitting on a small stool changed his gaze, and it fell on a large stone that was the densest among the stones. The 11th Wang Mingyin will be the first to charge. Will he be able to survive if he is placed in a death trap?
Chapter 206.
His gaze shifted slightly. There is a girl from the Wang family who is holding an instant. Should she fight to the death or suppress it? The old man kept muttering to himself. When he saw the circling green and white luan, he clicked his tongue and said, "Chaos is everywhere." Chaos, really chaos. There is order in chaos. Finally, the old man stretched out 2 fingers and rubbed his graying temples out of habit. He frowned and said, "Is the Su of Gojoseon going up against the great Liang dragon sparrow today? Allow this old man to do some calculations." The old man did not look at the chaos on the table. He thought for a while, intending to calculate with his fingers. He did not expect that when he closed his eyes, he would take a nap. He no longer cared about the chess game on the table. He smacked his lips and murmured in his half-awake state, "The fragrance of the fish is really fragrant." Was this gluttonous and mischievous old man really the #1 chess player in the past 500 years whom the Grand Chancellor of the Xianxia Academy half ridiculed and half jokingly said, "Transcendent and without vulgarity, truly not human"? The old man, who looked like an ordinary old scholar, was about to fall asleep when a sudden clap of thunder sounded from the ground. Continuous and unending. Young man of the Wu family, do you really want to die? How long will the Su of Gojoseon's sword be a decoration? What did the old god of swords mean that there was a sword aura in his name? The green glow of the sword in Li Chuangong's hand suddenly increased. Even Pei Nanwei could clearly see that the old god of swords' 3-foot cold blade was like a green snake entrenched in the ground. Previously, it was only wisps and could not be seen clearly. Now, it was as thick as an arm and completely covered the sword itself. The sword lifted and the bamboo pole in Wu Liuding's hand that had been cut like a short dagger was completely crushed into fine powder. Not only that, Wu Liuding, who was originally at ease, was now in a difficult situation. A corner of his sleeve was cut off by the sharp sword aura. Li Chungang did not seem to want to give Wu Liuding a chance to unsheath the Su of Gojoseon. He laughed loudly and did not show any mercy. After a round of swordsmanship competition, this old man clearly chose the unpopular path of the overbearing sword. If you want to be overbearing, as a swordsman, this old man had countless enemies in his life. Who could be more overbearing than the 2-sleeved green snake? This old man's sword was neither rising nor falling. To the east, he saw the Guangling tide and crossed the river. To the north, he saw thousands of wild bulls galloping. He stepped on them as if they were flat ground. To the south, he saw the huge waves of the ocean and exploded the river with one sword. To the west, he went to Mount Lantua and asked Buddha with his sword. He killed Luohan 23. Li Chuangong's sword momentum increased again. Was there no end? Could it be that he wanted to enter the realm of the land sword Immortal in one go? Wu Luding, who did not have a sword in his hand, had already wandered back and forth from the gates of hell several times.
The flat road was full of desolation and countless ravines crisscrossed. Behind Wu Luding, the swordswoman who could be considered as the best swordsman in the sword tomb slowly opened her eyes. The Su of Gojoseon on her back trembled and made the sound of cicadas.
But she knew that when this famous sword was unsheathed, and when it was handed over to Wu Luding,
it was very particular. If she was not careful, she would not save people but harm people. Jiang and I heard the sound of thunder outside the carriage and finally could not hold back. She carefully lifted the curtain.
When she saw the unparalleled sword aura of Li Chungang in the distance, she only said softly, "Very beautiful words."
Yu Yue sat in the corner of the carriage, holding the frightened white cat Wu Mainyang. Because the two young Kuei were lying in the carriage, she heard Jiang Ni's words and glanced at the red sandalwood sword case at her feet.
The corner of her mouth revealed a bitter smile.
Bluebird asked, "Young master, is the sword crown of the Wu family going to be defeated?" Su Fengnian was only focused on watching the battle. He did not turn around.
He shook his head and said, "Defeat is inevitable.
This Wu Luding is too arrogant. If he had pulled out the Su of Gojoseon from the beginning, it would not be like this. But it's hard to say whether he will die. As the most outstanding genius of the sword tomb, Wu Luding should have a few trump cards. It all depends on whether he can get the Su of Gojoseon before all his schemes are exhausted. Back then, Su Xiao said that I was not allowed to hold a blade for 10 years. At that time, I was not sensible and let go of everything in a fit of anger. If not for that, I would have arranged for the experts in the residence to kill each other and steal all their hidden supreme arts. No matter what method I use, I will not stop until I reach the threshold of the Vajra realm. Otherwise, I will not have the face to return to Bailiang.
Bluebird smiled gently and said, "It's not difficult."
Su Fengnian's mood improved slightly. He chuckled and said, "Thank you for your kind words." Pei Nanwei could not understand the relationship between Bailiang's His Royal Highness and the female servant called Bluebird. How could there be such an intimate master and servant in Jing and Palace? Su Fengnian suddenly turned to Princess Pei and asked, "You heard everything?" Princess Jing nodded subconsciously and then shook her head. After being hit in the abdomen by the winter-embroidered scabbard, she was really scared. She turned her head to scare Princess Pei, but she inadvertently saw Bluebird and the scarlet spear in her hand. She was a little absent-minded. The ancient spear was the only one among the 9 great divine weapons in the world. Not only was the tip of the spear not sharp, it was abnormally blunt and had a strange curve. But it was this blunt spear that had been soaked in the blood of countless masters in the hands of the great Grandmaster Wang Xiu. Wang Xiu single-handedly dominated Jianghu for 20 years. He was known for his decisiveness in killing. Countless people died under his spear. No matter the level of his martial arts, no matter his family background, he would pull out his spear and kill people in anger. Among the 4 great grandmasters, he was the most bloodthirsty and warlike. He would fight to the death to improve his cultivation. Wang Xiu's journey north to Dunhuang was the bloodiest. Every time he killed someone, he would use his spear to pierce through the enemy's head. The first martial arts evaluation said that Wang Xiu stood up at 30 years old. His spear technique was both real and fake. He advanced and retreated quickly. When he was motionless, he was like a mountain. When he moved, he was like thunder. His vitality was unparalleled in the world. The second martial arts evaluation list said that Wang Xiu had no doubts at 40 years old. He focused on the origin of martial arts and returned to the natural state. He was extremely refined and eventually established his own school of spear techniques. The third time on the list, Wang Xiu was said to be familiar with all kinds of spear techniques. He was so familiar that he forgot his hands and then forgot his spear. He was already a spear immortal. When he saw Bluebird holding the ancient spear, Su Fengnian felt for the first time in his life that Bluebird was a death warrior. She was as cold as a dead object. Just as Su Fengnian was in a daze when he saw the instant spear, a figure rushed out from the reeds and shouted, "His Royal Highness, be careful of the earth armor under your feet." Almost at the same time that person warned, the earth under Su Fengnian's feet exploded. A huge monster was about to break out of the ground. Bluebird's face turned pale. The instant spear in her hand stabbed at the puppet that was sneakily attacking His Royal Highness. "Can I make it in time?" Her eyes lit up. They were dazzling. For some reason, Su Fengnian, who should have been killed in one blow, pulled out his winter embroidery blade. It was as if he had done it intentionally or unintentionally. It was as if he had done it on purpose.
One sword Immortal kneels. On the path in the rain, Li Chungang had once used an umbrella as a sword to break the water armor of the Talisman General's red armor.
Su Fengnian had tried so hard to learn the essence of that sword move.
However, at the moment of life and death, he had finally merged it into his winter embroidery blade.
Pei Nanwei only saw the dandy prince's beautiful clothes fluttering in the wind as he stabbed down with one hand. It was a natural move. The assassin was forcefully stabbed back into the ground. Chapter 207.
The young master who had left the capital and then returned to Shangyin Academy sat on the Tianbo Kaijing Memorial Arch, swinging his legs and holding a thin reed pipe in his mouth.
His surname was Zhao, the imperial surname of the Son of Heaven. His given name, Kai, was given by his mother. It was the Kai of regular script and the Kai of regular tree.
At first, he thought that his mother wanted him to behave like a regular script, to behave like a person with a square body, to act like a straight brushstroke, to be a role model.
Later, he entered the palace and went with his great master to worship the ancestors alone. Only then did he know that there was a Kai tree in the Zhao family's mausoleum that was personally planted by the ancestors. Its branches were straight and did not bend. The branches and leaves of the tree were luxuriant, just like the royal family of the Zhao family. However, every time Zhao Kai heard his great master look at the tree and earnestly nag about the honor and disgrace of the Zhao family, he did not feel anything. To him, this home was not as comfortable and safe as the hut he had fled to when he was a child. Thus his great master, who doted on him very much, could not help but helplessly say that his temperament was too loose. Zhao Kai did not care.
If it were not for his lack of ambition, presumably the number of attempts on his life would have been doubled.
That man who held the power of the world in his hands had 6 sons and 1 daughter. Including him, who did not have a proper title, there were a total of 7 princes. Of those who wanted to kill him and took action, there were 2. The rest who did not make a move, mostly harbored ill intentions. The only person Zhao Kai did not dislike was the princess sister who always liked to oppose him. She really was the apple of that man's eye. However, although her temperament was fierce and unreasonable, it was all displayed on the surface. Every time they met, Zhao Kai would always use the fine freckles on the tip of her nose to talk about things. He would always get his way. The number of night pearls that she had thrown and smashed was at least 8. She really was a daughter who did not know how to live her life.
Whoever married her would suffer a calamity. He lowered his head to look at the last Talisman General red armor under his feet. It was like a divine general that a Taoist immortal master had invited from the heavenly court to the mortal world.
It was 3 meters tall, with both hands pressed on the hilt of dragon fault, stabbing straight into the ground.
This was the golden armor of the Talisman General red armors. Among the 5 armors, it was the most firm and indestructible, and its fighting strength was the most vigorous.
Especially the dragon fault in its hands, its sword chi was unbridled and majestic.
This sword had never been born before. It was the great master who had begged an old sword forger to spend 5 years of painstaking effort to forge it.
Every inch it was forged, the sword chi would grow by 3 parts.
When it was halfway forged, that sword forger already did not dare to continue.
Later on, Zhao Kai heard that it was the great master who had captured the old sword forger's family members. He killed 1 person every day, and only his grandson was left. Only then did the sword forger continue forging. When Dragon Fault was forged, he pleaded in front of the great master to spare his grandson's life. The great master nodded, and the old sword forger jumped into the sword furnace to commit suicide. However, the old sword forger's grandson was strangled by the great master in the blink of an eye. After hearing this, Zhao Kai did not say anything.
He only felt guilty in his heart.
His great master was not a Buddhist bodhisattva like his second master.
He was secretly called a terrifying figure by the imperial court, and had commanded 100,000 eunuchs for more than 20 years.
He was Han Diaoxi, who was cursed as a human cat. He was also a grandmaster-level expert who had skinned red armor alive. Zhao Kai had once seen a group of assassins being killed by his great master's left hand, which was wrapped in 3,000 red threads. They were all sliced off the top of their heads with a single finger. He killed without batting an eyelid. His great master never forgot to smile at him. Zhao Kai also never felt that his great master's arrogance was sinister. It was just like when his mother was sick beyond cure and was as thin as a matchstick. In Zhao Kai's eyes, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world.
Zhao Kai held the reed in his mouth and said softly, "When fighting in the reed marshes, the wooden armor has the advantage. It's a pity that my brother-in-law came early. In autumn, the reeds are easy to burn, and the power of the fire armor is doubled. If the water armor was not destroyed by the old god of swords, those Baelyong retainers would not have been able to return. I don't need to send the earth armor to assassinate them secretly. I can just wear the golden armor and crush them openly. Don't you think so, little gold?" The red armor was already a dead man before he put on the armor. Naturally, he did not respond. The corpse in the red armor under Zhao Kai's feet had a particularly sensitive origin. When he was alive, he was one of the few first-grade Vajra realm experts. It was a pity that he met the #1 finger Xian expert, Han Diaoxi, and had a miserable end. Zhao Kai had once asked his great master about the strength of the heavenly phenomenon realm. This great master of the Great Martin Temple laughed and said that in the future, this old servant would be able to defeat the enemy with both hands. However, it would be more interesting if a finger Xian realm expert could kill a heavenly phenomenon realm expert. Zhao Kai thought that his great master was truly formidable. He gently blew off the reed and stretched his body. His eyes were clear and indifferent as he looked at the wood armor and fire armor that were in a stalemate not far away. Since the Wu clan sword tomb and Wang Mingyin were taking the lead today, Zhao Kai did not want to steal the limelight. In any case, as long as he and the 4 armors showed their faces, it would be the most practical form of restraint and threat. There was no harm in openly sitting on the most eye-catching archway and acting as bait. Lu Qiantang entered the reed marsh with the resolve to die. The 4 of them obviously had no chance of winning against the 4 armors. It was not difficult to understand His Royal Highness' intention. They would stall for as long as they could. Outside the reed marsh, Li Chungang had an 80% chance of winning against the junior swordsman Wu Lu Ding. The halberd Ning Amei, the 100 light cavalry, and the unfathomable maid Blue Bird had at least a 50-50 chance of winning. As long as they could win in the 2 battles close to the air, the outcome would be set. So what if the 4 people in the reed marsh died fighting to the death? He had already mentally prepared himself for this kind of situation when he saw the king of Baelyong with his own eyes at the tide listening pavilion. How many of the young masters from aristocratic families were not ruthless and ruthless? Even if they did not have the great talent and bold vision of their fathers, they had all learned their temperament and temperament. Judumi Daoist Wei Shuyang did not directly participate in the battle. He only watched calmly from the sidelines. The laborious work had to be done by Lu Yongshu and the other 2. There was no other way. Even a blind person could see that this old Taoist was more important than the 3 of them combined in the heart of the air. Fortunately, there was a talisman general in red armor under the archway to protect the unrestrained young man sitting on the archway. There were only 2 puppets in front of them that gathered the supernatural powers of Buddhism. As for the earth armor, it must be hiding underground, waiting for a critical moment to deliver a fatal blow. Lu Qiantang did not decline his responsibility and took the lead to advance with his sword. He faced one of the red armor alone. The plump Xu Xiao and the snow-white Yang Qingfeng worked together to deal with the other one. It was probably because Lu Qiantang knew that the chances of survival in this battle were not high. Not only did he not lose his qi, but he was also full of fighting spirit. The sword will that he had comprehended while watching the tide in Guangling belonged to the lineage of the old god of swords. Li Chuangong's sword on the river was 200 feet long, allowing Lu Qiantang to gain a lot. He no longer had any worries when he swung his sword. The red cloud sword in his hand was indomitable. No matter how tough the red armor in front of him was, Lu Qiantang only cared about using the sword in his hand to relieve the various hardships and injustices of the past 40 years. Every time the red armor clashed with the sword, a string of sparks would be produced. Xu Xiao's palm struck the chest of one of the red armor's talisman generals. She suddenly exerted force and only made the red armor sway slightly. The agile and ghostly Yang Qingfeng swept her leg across the armor's head, but the other party did not move at all. It stretched out its arm to break Yang Qingfeng's calf, but the latter had already retreated with the force of the spring. Xu Xiao took the opportunity to hit the red armor repeatedly. Each hit was more powerful than the last. This kind of fierce attack did not match her figure. Every time there was a dull sound, the red armor was finally forced to retreat, leaving a mark on the ground. The charming woman who had betrayed the southern borders witch sect was furious. She reprimanded, "Yang, you have the nerve to let a woman block in front of you? Which woman did you use all your strength on last night?" After Yang Qingfeng fell to the ground like a fallen leaf, She rushed forward like a leopard in an instant and kicked the red armor's waist. In response to Xu Xiu's ridicule and abuse, she only said softly, "Your mother." Xu Xiu was furious after hearing this, but she could only vent her anger on the red armor in front of her. Her beautiful face showed a trace of ferocity. She put one palm on the red armor's chest and the other palm quickly folded on the back of her hand. She shouted, "Go to hell!" Bang! The red armor of the talisman general finally fell backwards, smashing a huge hole in it.
At this time at this place, Xu Xiu and Xu Xiu hurriedly retreated together. Xu Xiu shouted, "Old Taoist way."
The warlock Wei Shuyang squinted his eyes and smiled. His steps were like moving clouds and flowing water, as if he was stepping on the stars in the sky.
His solemn Taoist robe fluttered.
Finally, he pointed 2 fingers to the sky and put the other hand on his arm. He made a gesture and said, "If you don't step on the stars, you won't move.
Rise." When Wei Shuyang's foot stepped down,
36 peachwood swords broke out of the ground around the red armor, who had just risen from the ground and were suspended in the air.
Chapter 208.
Of course, this wasn't the skill of a sword immortal, but a strange Taoist technique. Since Taoism took killing demons as their responsibility, they naturally had their own mysterious skills. With a flip of old Taoist Mi's finger, the 36 swords all pointed downwards towards the red armor on the ground. The old Taoist, who had studied spells for half his life, silently chanted an incantation, and the sword formation rapidly descended. Speaking of which, it was strange that when they were on the small path, other than being broken by Li Chuangong's mysterious dewdrop's finger and the umbrella transforming into tornado, even the horse and LV Qiantong's big sword could not hurt it the slightest bit. Right now, unexpectedly the wooden sword made from the peach tree pierced through the armor one after another. No less than 36 swords, turning the red armor into a hedgehog.
Wei Shuyang's skills weren't limited to this.
Through His Royal Highness's drawing of the cloud patterns on the water armor, he could infer how the red armor operated like qi. The old Taoist bent his finger again and drove the 2 peachwood swords at his waist a few inches deeper into the armor. He said in a deep voice, "Yang Qingfeng, hold these 2 swords and take off the armor."
Yang Qingfeng retreated and returned.
He grabbed the 2 peachwood swords with both hands and slashed it heavily, directly cutting the red armor in half. The red armor talisman general that was like an undead ferocious chief finally stopped moving.
Wei Shuyang felt relieved.
Seeing that the strange young master on the archway still didn't react, he thought for a moment and said in shock, "Not good. Yang Qingfeng, quickly inform His Highness to be careful of the earth armor." On the archway, Zhao Kai frowned and muttered to himself. He sensed it. He lowered his head and laughed. "Little Jean, I didn't expect that Little Wood would be destroyed by that warlock before it could be of any use.
Go. Avenge Little Wood."
It was a joke to be a general in Bailiang who didn't dare to charge into battle. From the king of Bailiang Su Xiao to the little butcher Chen Zhibao to the invincible white bear Yuan Zuozong with a silver spear, who wasn't brave enough to take the lead. Facing the incomparably valiant Wang Mingyin, Ningame dragged his halberd and charged forward. His horse was heavily armored, and his halberd was fierce. Under his command, the crossbows behind him continued to shoot without stopping, regardless of whether they would accidentally injure him. Ningame wanted to exhaust this world's best martial artist to death. He urged his horse towards Wang Mingyin who was striding towards him. Enemies met on a narrow path. Ningame's iron halberd accurately pierced into the man's chest. At the border of Bailiang, countless Baimang enemies were pierced into the air by his halberd.
Wang Mingyin's footsteps paused slightly.
He stretched out an arm and punched the iron halberd. The halberd trembled. Ningame didn't let go of it, but the tip of the halberd could only stab downwards. Wang Mingyin leapt into the air and kicked Ningame off his horse. Ningame was indeed a fierce general. Wang Mingyin's kick left a huge imprint on his chest armor. However, he didn't fall to the ground after falling from his horse. He used the heavy halberd to drag the ground to reduce the force brought by the martial artist. When he stood still, Ningame's mouth was clearly oozing thick blood. Wang Mingyin didn't seem to expect this Bailiang martial artist to be able to stand and not fall. There was a strange look in his eyes. He didn't rush to attack and didn't care about the crossbows. Once the arrows got close to him, he easily reached out with his hand. The sharp arrows of the mountain opening crossbows were like soft cotton that didn't hurt or itch to him. Ningame saw that Wang Mingyin wasn't moving.
He abruptly stabbed his halberd into the ground and took off his helmet with both hands. He threw away his bag full of short halberds and then brazenly took off his armor. Wang Mingyin was expressionless the entire time. He waited until the brave general pulled out his halberd before he stepped forward. Facing Ning Mei, who was ranked 11th in the world, alone, he also silently charged forward. Indeed, if he wanted to kill someone, then he would kill someone. Why would he have so much nonsense to say? Just fight to your heart's content. Was there a need to flatter or slander each other? The halberd under Ning Mei's horse still had an astonishing momentum. It cut, pierced, hooked, pecked, and spun as he wished. The halberd, which weighed nearly 100 pounds, was swung in his hand with yin and yang. Wang Mingyin maintained the stiff face of a poor farmer. Faced with the ferocious attack of the halberd, he raised his arm to block. It could be seen that the hard body of the halberd was squeezed into an arc. When it was pressed to the limit, the halberd rebounded at an even faster speed. Ning Mei used the momentum to turn his body. His feet twisted a circular hole in the ground, and the halberd cleaved a large circle in the air, producing an ear-piercing sound of wind. The bow halberd once again smashed toward Wang Mingyin. The latter, who had been handling it single-handedly all this time, stuck his left palm to the halberd. His right hand went around the halberd and held it with both palms facing each other. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, Ning Mei was unwilling to let go of the halberd. Even though his palm exploded with blood, even though his tall and sturdy body was pulled into a large arc, the shoes on his feet were immediately tattered and dust flew around him. Wang Mingyin, who had previously said that he wanted to borrow the heir's head, finally spoke a second time. "Let me borrow your halberd." Ning Mei's halberd immediately left his hand. The thick arm holding the halberd drooped down powerlessly, fresh blood dripping down. Wang Mingyin had obtained the halberd, but he didn't use it. He tossed it out and nailed a crossbow-wielding Bailiang cavalryman to the ground. The halberd's tip was pointed up, and the corpse was on the ground. The halberd's body trembled slightly. Ning Mei didn't even look at the predictably tragic situation. He drew his Bailiang blade with his left hand. Wang Mingyin asked, "You're not retreating?" Ning Mei's lips moved slightly, but no sound could be heard. The cold, shiny blade in his hand showed no signs of returning to its sheath. Wang Mingyin sighed softly. He walked toward this Bailiang cavalry general, fully deserving of his reputation. He was determined to kill him. Although this would delay him from taking the Bailiang heir's head, these Bailiang soldiers made it clear that they wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. In front of the carriage, Pei Nanwei was shocked beyond words by the scene in front of her eyes. First, there was an unknown assassin trying to burrow out of the ground to assassinate Su Fengnian. Then, there was this saber adorned His Royal Highness stabbing down. No matter how ignorant Pei Nanwei was, she could still feel that this blade wasn't just for show. If it was just this, Pei Nanwei would have been more willing to turn her head to watch the confrontation between the two swordsmen at the end of the official road, or to see how the farmer cut through the Bailiang cavalry's formation like a hot knife through butter. However, the assassin underground seemed to be proficient in divination. He didn't always hide underground, but could move about underground. After being stabbed by Su Fengnian, he immediately burst out of the ground nearby. Su Fengnian's embroidered winter blade swept out, chopping directly at the waist of the red-armored seal general, sending countless sparks flying. In one breath, he reached the yellow court. The faint purple mark between Su Fengnian's eyebrows became more and more obvious. Su Fengnian's strike hit its target. In the blink of an eye, the one-handed embroidered winter blade became a two-handed grip. Instead of retreating, he advanced, not 5 steps away from the red-armored seal general. Why should one walk 10 steps to kill someone? The two-handed embroidered winter blade swept out a resplendent ray of light, cutting from the red-armored seal's head to his waist. Another long string of dazzling sparks flew. This blade came from the splitting waterfall on Mount Wudong. Earth Armor's fist smashed down, but Su Fengnian had already smoothly retracted his blade. The trajectory was extremely beautiful, and the strength he exerted was fierce, but there was still plenty of strength to be accumulated. Accumulating strength was for the next blade. Why did Su Fengnian choose to practice swordsmanship instead of standing swordsmanship when he was picking secret manuals on the mountain? It was because he was fond of the hob, which was a different approach to swordsmanship, but the result was the same. Su Fengnian held embroidered winter blade without hesitation, stabbing forward with the momentum of a rainbow piercing the sun.
This was clearly the most decisive and domineering thorn whale from the Forbidden Villa's whale-killing sword. The whale-killing sword was similarly majestic when used with a blade. The tip of embroidered winter blade pierced the red-armored seal general's chest. Su Fengnian did not seem to feel the skin on his palm being stained with blood. The blade stabbed forward without any hesitation. Earth Armor's heavy feet slid backwards, sliding again and again. The thorn whale succeeded in one strike. The two-handed grip became one-handed. The spring thunder exploded out of the scabbard. Su Fengnian's left hand was simple and unadorned spring thunder. The moment the blade struck, it was the most exquisite sword style from the Greenwater Pavilion sword practice manual. Overlapping thunder. In an instant, 6 claps of thunder sounded. All of them smashed into Earth Armor's waist. After the overlapping thunder and thorn whale, embroidered winterblade used the swordsmanship of the Thousand Swordgrass Compendium. The spring thunder also did not stop, and used the covering armor of the previous generation Wu family sword tomb sword attendant Zhao Yute. Earth Armor staggered backwards. Following that, Su Fengnian used a total of 16 blades in one go. Every blade contained the essence of the ancestors' blood and sweat. When Su Fengnian finally retreated, although the red-armored seal general did not show any signs of defeat, he no longer had any arrogance to speak of. Pei Nanwei saw the crown prince of Bailiang standing confidently with long and short blades in his hands. She could only see the side of his face. He was grinning maliciously.